Today, we will embark on a tale of a prince born out of wedlock from the royal family. A girl transmigrates into a comic book world and becomes a character never before seen in the original story. Will she be able to change the fate of the prince who is mistreated and gradually loses his humanity to protect himself, or will the outcome remain unchanged? Let's find out together. Outside a magnificent, majestic castle, under a sky painted with azure and adorned with the golden rays of the sun, birds chirp merrily. What story will this castle unfold? A small hand reaches out through a window. The girl is struggling to climb onto the windowsill. What has made the girl tiptoe and lean out of the window like this? Suddenly, her eyes turn sad, and she whispers, "Finally." In the garden, horse-drawn carriages parade in a procession. The girl thinks, finally, this day has come. Today is the day Sirius, the younger brother of the current emperor and the insignificant fly under his thumb, arrives at the castle as a duke. The servants gossip and whisper, one servant remarking, "His Majesty is really too much." Hearing the gossip, the little girl thinks, what's so special about an ordinary, naive 10-year-old boy? Sirius was special from the moment he was born. Though he bore royal blood, he was a child born out of wedlock, a common occurrence for the former emperor, who ruled according to his whims. One might think that this boy is just a small, pitiful bear. But in reality, he is a powerful and ferocious beast. Just like a warrior who carries both royal blood and a wild streak. Sirius's mother was shocked, but she was a legendary royal warrior herself. The girl is lost in thought, contemplating the information she has gathered about this young man. A child born out of wedlock and the shadow of the royal family, the crown prince killed everyone who thought Sirius would lose and not become the new emperor. Blood flowed like a river, staining the noble throne red. But even so, the crown prince could not kill Sirius. Because that is the legend of the royal family, it is the throne on which he stands, and it is also the throne that will cause him to collapse. In the end, the crown prince became emperor and became increasingly paranoid, while Sirius was imprisoned in a castle. And sent to the duke's house in the north, which is this castle. The little girl still curiously follows the situation outside the window. Then, suddenly, a figure passes by, bumping into the stool she is using, causing her to stagger and lose her balance. A young man and a woman with smug faces, the young man sarcastically remarks that there is really nothing as crazy as the little girl and tells the woman to ignore her. The little girl loses her balance and falls to the ground, speechless. These are the members of her family. Her eldest brother decided to go hunting monsters alone in the middle of winter and never came back. Her 10-year-old son died while taking a test, but the duke reacted like this. He said he thought maybe he could use a sword, but maybe he was wrong. Her second brother died after trying to use a small amount of poison to gradually build up his body's resistance to poison. The duke was displeased and paid no attention to his son's death. Her third sister was an outstanding and brilliant woman, but she died 2 days before her 19th birthday because she could not bear the pressure of the exams and decided to commit suicide. The most anticipated child took his own life, which made the duke sigh. The remaining 2 men and women are the girl's surviving brother and sister. The duke taught them that compassion will make us weak. Useless emotions must be eliminated if they are to be closer to the position of heir in the future. Finally, it is understandable why the boy was sent here, a place where he would be treated very cruelly and perhaps despair to the point of death. At this point, the older sister got angry and shouted angrily. The little girl was startled back to the present. Our grandparents taught that in such situations, it is best to run away. The little girl immediately put this into practice, leaving her angry sister to shout after her. After all, to live in a house like this. In the end, the crown prince's ambition to trample everyone underfoot has become a reality. This is the content of the original story that Elena read when she was still young, and she loved this romantic story. A character in the sweet potato kingdom. But after all, it was fortunate that Elena knew the future. Thanks to that, the girl was able to make a plan to protect herself. As she walked up the stairs, she thought, will my family be destroyed? It's not my business either. Now she just needs to follow the predetermined plan. The girl went into her room and threw herself onto the bed. Her plan was to be silent and do nothing. Because whether or not, all she needs is for Sirius to follow the plot. The girl fell into a weary sleep with thoughts of the future. Suddenly, a question arose, why am I here? The little girl sat up abruptly and looked towards the front door. The voice just now was a boy who looked very much like Sirius. A figure loomed outside the door, a young man with gray hair. It was Sirius, but why was he here now? The girl was very confused. She sat uneasily in her room, not knowing what to do. Then, as if regaining her composure, her eyes lit up and she covered her mouth, thinking that if she continued to be silent like this, no one would know there was someone in this room. At this point, Sirius was talking to another man outside, and then the two left. At this point, the little girl slowly approached the crack in the door. She quickly locked the door and thought, now that Sirius has appeared, this family will soon be in chaos. But she was too clumsy. Suddenly, Elena slipped. Unexpectedly, the boy was still outside the door. Elena couldn't believe this part of the story. Losing her balance, the little girl walked straight up to Sirius. The girl's face was pale green with panic. The boy, on the other hand, looked at her sternly. This was Sirius of this story. This unexpected encounter left Elena speechless. Sirius spoke up, saying he thought it was just a gust of wind. Elena's heart was pounding. She was doomed. She had planned to live a quiet life. But she ran into Sirius in a situation like this. She looked at Sirius's extremely handsome face right in front of her. He was clearly a madman, but his face was so handsome that Elena couldn't look away. But in contrast to this angelic face, he had killed more than 10 of his fiancées with his own hands. The thought of this terrified Elena. She shivered and cursed, what a maniac. She assessed the situation. If she caused a scene, she would be doomed too, no joke. So, she chose to put on her innocent face. She dusted off and straightened Sirius's clothes, thinking that if she could quickly get out of the scenario, she would do anything. However, Sirius suddenly grabbed her hand. Then the two looked at each other, their eyes meeting in confusion. Sirius even complimented the girl, saying that she was indeed beautiful. These words flustered Elena. She couldn't believe he was looking at her and complimenting her. She stammered back, what? She couldn't believe that this young man was so bold as to compliment her on her beauty the first time they met. Elena thought to herself, is this the kind of compliment that normal people say? No, it can't be a real compliment. He doesn't seem to mean it. Sirius was curious about the girl's identity. He asked her who she was. Elena hesitantly answered her identity, Elena Rode. Hearing this name, Sirius seemed to know that she was the youngest daughter of the Duke. Elena wondered how he knew her. Then, Sirius suddenly leaned over and looked at her. It turned out that he was looking into the room through the door, which was the girl's room. Casually, as if it were nothing, he asked, is this the room of that woman, and walked inside as if to inspect. Elena thought to herself, it's really rude to look straight into the room of a noble lady like that, even if she's young. But her room was nothing special either. It was just a very ordinary room. However, Sirius was lost in thought. Then he muttered something to himself, it's so similar. Elena didn't understand what he meant. Did he mean that it was similar to his imagination of the youngest daughter of the Duke's room? But Elena dismissed that unbelievable idea of hers. Normally, when thinking of a lady's room, one would think of a warm bed with pink curtains, a cute baby sofa, a wooden rocking horse with jewels, or a room full of cute things and sweets. On the contrary, her room was very simple. It didn't even have a teddy bear, although it wasn't a gloomy room or anything. In the past, the Duke's mansion had such a room for the youngest daughter of the Duke, and it was thought to be Elena's. But now her older sister was using it. But this room was still much better than the other rooms. Because the Duke had said that in order to have such great things, she had to prove her worth. Standing before her father as the Duke, Elena had to prove her worth and suitability to the family. Thinking about these things made Elena very scared and worried. Looking at Sirius in front of her at the moment, the girl wondered if he was going to tour the mansion or if she wanted to be alone. Suddenly, she caught Sirius's eyes staring intently at her. Sirius suddenly approached, making Elena scared and take a few steps back. He asked, from the answer you gave just now, it seems like you don't lack anything, do you? Sirius stared at the girl as if he wanted to interrogate her for an answer. Then he spoke up and said. Unexpectedly, he said, Elena is useless indeed. This left Elena speechless and unable to understand what he meant. With that, Sirius turned abruptly and walked away. Leaving Elena bewildered and confused, she plopped down on the ground and watched him go. Sirius turned away and thought to himself that there was one thing that everyone said was the most precious treasure of the Rode ducal family, the golden eyes. Thinking of Elena's eyes at this moment, her golden eyes sparkled like precious stones. Then he remembered the people he had met before with their wicked faces. Sirius was sure that the sisters of the Count and even the Count himself did not have such a clear golden glow in their eyes. But compared to the Duke's sharp eyes, it didn't seem to fit well. On the contrary, the eyes on Elena's face looked softer. After all, compared to the people Sirius had met, the girl was the most special, looked most like the Road family, but also the weakest. This made him think a lot. Sirius thought that the little girl right now was not a threat to him at all. A moment later, the Duke gathered everyone in the house and began to introduce his guest. "It's Sirius, His Majesty's younger brother," the Duke said. "His Majesty will be staying in our mansion from now on." The older sister asked curiously, "What is the reason for this?" The Duke explained that His Majesty had personally requested him to be in charge of educating Prince Sirius, so the prince would be studying math with his children. Hearing this, the two older sisters were overjoyed and praised their father for becoming the prince's teacher and rushed to flatter and congratulate him. However, the Duke only sneered and said nothing more. The atmosphere fell silent as if into an abyss. For Elena, this was almost a daily occurrence, and her mood for the day ended just like that. Then she glanced towards the main hall. Ever since he was exiled here from the royal palace to live with his family under the notorious Duke, he had been very calm. Since Elena couldn't see anything, she couldn't be completely sure that there was no way the golden eyes of the Road ducal family could be wrong, because they had the supernatural ability to read other people's emotions. The golden eyes of the Road ducal family have the supernatural ability to read other people's emotions. The more they resemble gold, the stronger the ability. The current Road Duke also used this ability to read his opponent's emotions after a fierce competition, and he became the head of the family. The flickering golden light amidst the crimson eyes. Even though it has reached this generation, those impressive golden eyes are still a standard. At this point, the Duke spoke up and said that His Majesty had personally ordered that the prince must follow his family's teaching methods. Then he asked again that if there was no objection here, he would become the prince's teacher, right? Hearing these words, the Duke cut short the words, to become a teacher. It was indeed the Duke's style. At this point, Sirius spoke up and said that he would accept His Majesty's request. The Duke will be his teacher now, and there is no need to teach techniques. The Duke didn't understand these requests. A criticism because it's a standard answer, so it's not interesting at all. Elena thought to herself, of course, no matter how many times she hears this conversation, she's still surprised. But Elena wondered how Sirius's emotions could not fluctuate at all. How could that be? The older sister quickly stepped forward and said that she would do her best to help Sirius. The Duke coldly replied, "If you can." Then he ordered everyone to disperse and turned and walked away. Elena lowered her head in fear as the Duke approached her. His cold eyes glanced at her. Then he left a sentence, "You are useless indeed." Then he walked past coldly without looking back at his daughter. Elena trembled in fear and clutched the hem of her dress, reassuring herself, "Come on, wake up. Those words are just my imagination. It's just because I've had to hear it so many times since then. I have to get used to it. The reason why the Duke hates me so much is because of the golden eyes that have been passed down through many generations. Among them, my eyes are unprecedented because they have the golden light of a brilliant dawn, perfect from every angle. Such special eyes will have the ability to see through other people's emotions with the naked eye. Even when Elena touches someone, she can feel their emotions." Elena glanced at him and thought to herself, "So if I don't see any emotional fluctuations, it's not real, right?" At this point, the older sister raised her voice and asked, "It seems like the Duke has left you a small problem, right?" Elena was very confused by her sister's attitude. The prince looked at her and showed no emotion at all. Then the older sister walked forward step by step, saying as she walked, "If your highness follows our natural system, you will have to be divided into ranks from low to high, but according to the Duke, we will divide the ranks from high to low based on the Duke's recognition." The older sister questioned, "However, I heard that your highness has been registered in the room for the lowest person, right?" Seeing this situation, Elena was very scared. It was her sister who made Sirius lose his spirit immediately. Elena remembered that ignoring respect like this was also effective in lowering others. Moreover, Sirius is the Emperor's younger brother after all. The fact that the Emperor wants to eliminate his brother publicly is known to everyone. Sirius's existence has no foundation, so her sister is not afraid at all. But Elena wondered if Sirius would take it lying down. From what she knew about Sirius, there was no way he would, because he was a madman or something. She was very curious to know how Sirius would deal with her sister. And once again, among the 36 strategies, running is the best policy. Elena silently ran away from this tense situation. She slowly turned and walked away, thinking about what she could do to satisfy her curiosity, even though she could feel the angry energy. She had to leave before anyone noticed. She silently left the room step by step. Her plan was to leave and run straight back to her room. But she suddenly turned her head to the side. Sirius had somehow come to her side and was staring at her intently. Looking at Sirius's face right in front of her, Elena wondered why he was following her. And what about her sister? She was frozen stiff and speechless now. The angry sister shouted, "Wait!" She rushed over and told Sirius to stop. Sirius then grabbed Elena's hand tightly. Elena didn't understand what was going on. Why her? Then she looked up. The sister was like a volcano erupting, her large cheeks flushed. "I'm talking to you. Can't you hear me?" Witnessing this scene made Elena gasp. The red light was the emotion of anger, and its heat spread almost over her entire body. On the contrary, Sirius calmly said that it wasn't that he didn't listen, but that he didn't care. The sister's face turned into a witch's when she heard this. Then she pointed at Elena and asked, "Your Highness, do you intend to side with Elena and go against us?" The brother added, "Isn't that a stupid choice for Sirius?" He even scorned the goods, saying that the little girl was not worth expecting and would even be humiliated. She was like an extra letter. The sister followed suit and took a few steps closer to the two of them. She fiercely shouted at Elena's face, "If it weren't for my father's orders not to touch you, she would have gouged out your eyes already." Elena closed her eyes in fear. These words reminded her of the Duke's words. He had once said that if he could, he would gouge out her eyes. Every time her father said such things, if he were her father, he would definitely gouge out her eyes. So every time she heard those words, she had a stupid habit of closing her eyes tightly. She bowed her head. She never wanted to have these eyes. No one wanted to know that someone hated them. It hurt as if someone was hitting her. Witnessing this, Sirius remained silent, his thoughts unclear. The sister took the opportunity to continue, "Anyway, as long as I step on Elena, she won't be able to move." She asked again, "Does your Highness still want to have dinner with Elena?" She continued, "If so, then there is nothing more to say. While I am still speaking politely, please follow the rules of my family." Sirius spoke coldly, asking the sister, "Who gave you the right to talk to me casually like that?" "Only my teacher is allowed to talk to me casually after I give him permission." Looking at Sirius like that, Elena was a little stunned. Finally, he had some emotional fluctuations. Of course, her eyes were never wrong. Looking at the colors surrounding Sirius, based on the intensity of these colors, he was definitely not afraid of the sister at all. The colors made her feel frustrated and uncomfortable. Then Sirius added, "Anyway, who here is the one who makes the rules in this family or whatever? You keep babbling on and on." All it took was one sentence for Sirius to seal the sister's mouth, making her stutter. Elena secretly exclaimed, "Wow, how could he make the sister lose face so easily? If I dare to treat her like that, I will be considered disrespectful to her father." Seeing how the sister was being treated the way she trampled on others, she looked very confused. Sirius sighed wearily at this point. Then he pulled Elena away and said, "I'm tired, so everyone disperse." Seeing this, Elena was confused. Why did he drag her along again? Just like that, the sister and the boy watched Sirius and Elena leave. The two walked to the door and slammed it shut. Elena looked at her arm that was being held tightly and thought to herself that it would be better if he would let go of her a little. Sirius let go of her hand and apologized awkwardly. Only then did Elena dare to breathe a sigh of relief because she thought Sirius had only grabbed her hand unconsciously. Then she quickly left before the two crazy people appeared again. She had to hurry back to the attic so she wouldn't get into trouble. But 20 minutes passed, and Elena seemed to be in trouble. It was Sirius following her. She wondered why he kept following her. She hurried her pace. She had felt this way from the beginning, but she thought it was just her imagination. Sirius was still following her at a slow pace. Elena wondered, but then what was the reason that he kept following her here? She was really confused and didn't know what to do. Should she tell him to stop following her? She really didn't want to talk to a madman. She clenched her fist. Even so, she didn't want him in her room. So she turned around abruptly. She looked Sirius straight in the face and asked, "Why do you keep following me?" Sirius was a little embarrassed. Elena looked at the boy straight on and saw that he looked much smaller than other 10-year-olds. This was easier than she thought. Then she asked why he kept following her. This was the way to her room. Sirius calmly replied that he knew. Elena felt confused looking at this boy. What was this shameless attitude of his when she had reminded him twice already? But that wasn't what she meant, Elena thought to herself as she stomped her foot on the ground. Seeing this, Sirius even smiled. He looked at her calmly. Elena was very excited. What was it? Just a moment ago, it was clearly the color of happiness. She didn't expect Sirius to be able to smile. Thinking about her actions, she wondered if it was so funny that he couldn't help but laugh. But it was also because she looked like this that her actions looked like a 10-year-old's as well. She tried her best to run up the stairs as fast as she could. Of course, it was hard to imagine that Sirius was the same age as her. Thinking about it, she chose running as the best policy. She was worried if he would continue to chase after her after seeing her run away like this. But to her surprise, he ran up the stairs too. The girl stopped and gasped, "I told you not to follow me." But Sirius calmly asked her if she had said that. Elena was exhausted. Even though she didn't say it. Before she could finish her thought, Sirius interrupted. He grabbed the doorknob and said that he wasn't following her either. Elena froze, not understanding anything. But then he went into the room next to her room. Elena was surprised by her own thoughts. But then again, she thought she remembered her sister saying that if Sirius's room was the one for the lowest person, then it must be next to her room. Just then, Sirius called out to her and asked if she had anything else to say. At this point, Elena just wished there was a big hole under her feet. Her face flushed red. Then she hurriedly opened the door, left a goodnight greeting, and rushed into her room. Sirius still calmly replied, "Good night to you too." Elena buried her head in the pillow, trying to hide her humiliation. She rolled around on the bed, unable to describe her embarrassment right now. Oh my God, why didn't I realize it right away? At that time, I was only thinking about running away. Then she secretly blamed her father for being too much. After all, she was a girl, so why would she have a strange boy from outside stay in the next room? Then she calmed down and thought that her father didn't care about her anymore. Just thinking about it gave her goosebumps. She remembered her sister's words. At this point, her father didn't allow her sister to touch her. Was it pity? The Duke meant that her life was not to be threatened. For her, the label of golden eyes was enough. Of course, even though the Duke didn't treat her like this from the beginning, she still remembered the day she was born. It was clear that she had died in her previous life. She had been floating in the darkness with vague memories. And Sirius's name was Sirius. She had read the novel about the main character's appearance. And before she could read the ending, she was pushed out and reincarnated. She was reincarnated as the youngest daughter in the most chaotic family in the novel. She couldn't help but cry. The announcement that Duke Road had arrived echoed in her ears. Looking at the man in front of her, was the Duke really her father? She was finished. The notorious, heartless Duke. She stared at him intently. How could this be? It was not clear in the novel she had read. Sirius was perfect as the main character. Of course, the genre of this novel was published on the local market. The requirement for the characteristics of the main character in the local market is vicious. Sirius was built based on these characteristics and defeated everyone. One more thing is that there is no Elena because he is built to be too cruel to be romantic. Sirius's goal is not love but to become the strongest person in the world. The families who want to use marriage to bind him all die. Among them, Duke Road, who had betrothed him to his fourth daughter, was trying to take advantage but also face death. Actually, this is a very long novel and Elena was reincarnated into that chaotic family, so that's the most important part. Duke Road, who raised Sirius as a madman, was a madman after all. So it's impossible for him to have a smile on his face, right? From a young age, Elena had seen the mist emanating from the Duke. He looked at the baby and muttered two words, "Perfect." The Duke named her Elena and instructed the servants to give her the room with the east garden. Moreover, he took the best possible care of her, lacking nothing. Witnessing this, the little Elena felt strange. The man in the novel treated his children very strictly, so why was she the only one who was treated specially? She had not appeared in the original work. Was there any hint of this seventh child? Then she seemed to think of something to explain her existence. A lovely daughter with a tyrannical father, a heart-healing novel, a touching story about teaching her to think that she had become the main character in such a story. The Duke, a cold man with his other children, had never cared for anyone else but her, so that must be it. Elena was completely convinced that this was a healing story. But it was only the beginning. One day, the Duke came to his daughter's room with a gloomy look on his face. He ordered all the servants to step back. Elena looked at the man who was her father in this novel. He always had a white haze around him lately. But the expression and the light surrounding him today was black smoke, as if he was suffocating. Little Elena was very scared. She had to run away quickly, but why was there this change? Remembering her happy memories with the Duke, why did she have such thoughts? He had always cared for her so much, so she thought there would be no problem. But that was before the moment his hands tightened around her neck. The little girl's eyes were filled with fear and panic as she looked at the shadow of her once gentle father, now a beast. Before she lost consciousness and heard the Duke's vague words. Elena vaguely heard the last words from him. He doubted whether she was really born with the golden eyes of the Road family. She would always know and run away first. Elena recalled what she had been through. Since that day, there had been many tests from her father to check the power she possessed. But the result was not satisfactory to him. It was really redundant. Was there really no power in her perfect golden eyes? Elena was very confused. What was the power in her golden eyes? There were definitely no such powers in the original work. So before she realized the true nature of the power, she was just constantly by the Duke's side, smiling at the threat to her because she was afraid to admit that the father who always cared about her was not that kind of person. It was meaningless. From the beginning, Duke Road had never loved her as his own child. He only cared about her golden eyes. It seemed that from the beginning, Elena was not in the race for inheritance. Even being bullied by her siblings, the Road family was already bad in itself. Her destiny was to die by Sirius's hand. She just had to endure a little more. She turned to look at the wall. After all, Sirius was just one wall away from her. The two of them were just neighbors. Even though she knew that, today was also a day that marked her dark history. Sirius would soon forget that dark history of hers if other events happened. But even so, it seemed like it had been a long time since she had seen that pure light of joy radiating from him. Elena was very embarrassed. Was it that funny? But that was right, if she were Sirius, she would be the same. Tossed and turned, she got up and looked at the wall as if she wanted to pierce it. She wondered what Sirius was doing. Then, like a pervert stalking her, she pressed her ear against the wall to listen. She made excuses for herself, just wondering if he slept in as late as she did. The other side of the room was very quiet. But suddenly she heard a sob that seemed to pierce her hand. Elena was very confused. She jumped up. What was that? A cry? Was the ruthless man in the original work crying? Even though the Duke put a lot of pressure on Sirius, his emotions didn't fluctuate. Even when the sister caused trouble, he only felt uncomfortable. But he knew how to cry? The sobs grew louder and louder. Even though Elena didn't need to put her ear to the wall, she could hear the faint sound coming through. What should she do? Elena was very worried. After all, he was only 10 years old. He was taken to a completely unfamiliar place and was heavily pressured by his teacher. But even so, if it were Sirius, his emotions would gradually fade away. Why was he crying? She didn't know if she should comfort Sirius or not. If she didn't know anything, she might as well pretend she didn't. But now she knew he was crying and she didn't want to just stand there and watch. Thinking about it again, she decided to just bury herself under the covers and stay safe. Even though she felt a sense of injustice, there was no other choice. She had to follow her plan of doing nothing. But she felt a little reluctant. Because of the jealousy in the time when her father's affection flowed, it was also from the time Elena was transferred to the attic that no one wanted to play with her anymore because they saw her as a joke and mocked her. But Sirius was the only one she could talk to. Thinking about this, she struggled to get up. Just comfort him, that's all. With that in mind, she opened the door and stepped out, telling herself that no one would notice. But why did she come back? Elena couldn't make a mistake. If something went wrong, the rules could be reversed. Elena told herself to remember her plan to do nothing, but to stand by his side if she wanted the Road family to fall smoothly. There could be no change in Sirius's emotions. She continued to mutter to herself that if she went over there to comfort him, it would be no different from indirectly admitting that she had eavesdropped on the wall. What if he got angry? Not to mention that the two of them weren't that close anymore. Even though she was reluctant, she had to do it. There were 1,000 reasons why she shouldn't go over there. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. Go to sleep quickly. It's not your business anyway. The next morning, Elena appeared with a haggard and dazed expression. It seemed that she hadn't slept well the night before. Elena hadn't slept a wink at all, haunted by nightmares and a guilty conscience. Why did she feel so sad about it that she couldn't sleep? If she thought about it rationally, it was just a waste of energy. After all, that boy was the main character of this novel. His future would be better than anyone else's. Seriously, who should be worried about whom? It was time to worry about Elena's own future first. She hurried towards the door. Let's go eat breakfast. She had to eat enough to grow taller because she hadn't slept enough. How could that boy make her not grow taller? As soon as she opened the door, Elena was completely surprised. Since when had this guy been sitting in front of her door? She was terrified and screamed in surprise. Why was this kid here? Was he waiting for Elena? She felt embarrassed for thinking that. Why would he be waiting for her? She suddenly screamed out loud. It was so embarrassing. At this moment, Sirius was still staring at her. Why was he just staring and not saying anything? What did he want? She stood there stiffly. What should she do? It would be a bit strange to just leave like that, wouldn't it? So she stiffly asked Sirius if he slept well. The guy replied curtly, yeah. Then Elena tried to sneak away. If so, Sirius wouldn't remember anything. It was just a very normal conversation. Now let's get out of here quickly. But the next sentence made Elena stop in her tracks. The boy asked her if she slept well. The girl was flustered by this question. She couldn't believe that a ruthless Sirius like him was actually asking her. Could it be that he was more sentimental after crying the night before? Looking at the boy in front of her, there was no way that could have happened. Elena thought it would be more reasonable if the boy had found out that she was eavesdropping and came to ask her. But as she glanced at him, something shiny caught her eye. The boy seemed happy, but why? Was his crying last night just a dream of hers? Ignoring him, she decided to go to the dining room before it was too late. Sirius followed her quietly. She sneaked a glance at him. She knew he would be having breakfast too. But because of the pressure, she hadn't seen him clearly yesterday. But he was definitely very smart and handsome. He would probably grow up to be a handsome guy with a cold expression. His hair was a bit messy, so he looked like a dandelion. After all, he was just a kid now. Elena was thinking as she walked. Sirius seemed to be shorter than her, but he looked cute now. There shouldn't be any problem, right? After walking for a while, the two of them arrived at the dining room. Elena complained, "It's so far even to the dining room." With that, she pushed open the door of the room. There was not a soul in sight, as she had expected. But why is there no one here in the morning? Of course, it was because the other people in the house had already finished eating and left. Duke Road discriminated not only against people but also against food. A child like Elena had to wait until everyone else had finished eating before she could have her turn. Thinking about this, Elena felt resentful. To be honest, even if this house collapsed immediately, it would be nothing. She could only trust Sirius now. A familiar scent wafted through the air. This smell was the smell of stewed tomatoes. Elena was very happy because she hadn't had a good meal in a long time. She was about to reach for the food when her hand was suddenly grabbed. She was confused. She didn't know what was going on. Sirius grabbed her hand and asked her where she was going. The girl didn't have time to understand the boy's meaning. She replied that she was going to get breakfast, but this was the dining room, right? Sirius wondered. Elena replied nonchalantly, "That's right, but if I just wait here all day, nothing will happen." She was about to explain more, but instead of standing there explaining, she decided it would be faster to just take the boy to see for herself. And in the blink of an eye, a plate of food was served. The two sat down at the table. It turned out that they had to go to the kitchen and bring their own food up every day in this house. Sirius muttered, "That's simple." Elena felt a bit sorry for him. Even though the boy was of royal blood, he didn't complain about being treated like this. It showed how ruthless the emperor was. She kept thinking about these nonsense thoughts in her head. She was about to eat quickly when she suddenly stopped. Sirius wasn't eating right now. He was just staring at her. Why wasn't he eating? Why was he just staring at her like that? He hadn't even picked up his chopsticks yet. Did he have something to say about the food? Elena silently observed her surroundings. There was no red light around him, so he was definitely not angry. So why? But she was starving to death now, so she decided to eat first and talk later. She broke the ice by saying, "Enjoy your meal." Sirius still stared at her without touching his food. Unexpectedly, he responded to Elena's words and started eating his own portion. The girl sighed in relief. Maybe she did the right thing. Before he ate, he seemed more polite than she thought. Thinking about it, Sirius had always stared at her and left after she greeted him. She was sure that Sirius waiting for her this morning was not an illusion. He was definitely waiting for her to greet him. But wait, why did he like to greet people? Then the girl thought, maybe Sirius is the name of a greeting or something. He has an extremely cute face, and if his platinum hair shone brightly like the sun like it does now, he would look like a fairy. But don't forget that he is Sirius, a cold-blooded madman. Even if his enemies shed blood, he knows how to get back at what he gets. Not like a fool like her. Elena thought about what she knew and sighed. On second thought, it was also strange that he cried last night. Even if Elena was curious, it didn't matter. She thought she just needed to do what she had to do. Suddenly Sirius stood up and left the dining room. Elena wondered what was going on. This time, he didn't say goodbye to her and just left. At this moment, outside the mansion, her sister was yelling and asking who the hell was this monster. Elena observed from above. Even though she was on the second floor, she could hear it. She looked down intently. Below her was also her brother. She guessed he was muttering and cursing at the madman. But it was right, if you saw Sirius training right now. Today was the first day that the Duke was teaching Sirius, so her goal in coming here was to see this scene. She wanted to see the main character in the first step. But it wasn't for that reason, it was just because she was bored. Elena had nothing to do in this mansion. Except for her two siblings coming to pick on her every now and then, she had no one to talk to all day. Compared to other things in this mansion, there are certainly many more important things. After the Duke abandoned her, everyone said that she would die soon because her body had been weak since she was born. But unlike when her sixth brother got sick and was abandoned to death by the Duke, he called a doctor to treat her. When you think about the Duke's cold expression, this was clearly a strange act, so everyone was confused about how to treat Elena. So in the end, they decided to treat her like air. If not air, then a ghost, because in this mansion, people only hated or ignored her. But the problem is that this ghost is still alive and always bored. So how could she miss out on exciting things like this match? Occasionally, it's hard to avoid things almost flying into her face. Elena was eager. When would she get to see it? The wolf's incarnation. Just imagine that a boy like him is proof of mythology. Maybe not only special physically, when compared to other people, Sirius's intuition is like a beast and his vision is even wider. Just like what my sister said, Sirius can't be an ordinary person. Could he be called a monster? Just then, the Duke ordered a stop. He stood sternly and looked at the boy. The Duke sarcastically asked if Sirius could only show him things like this. He criticized it as a real mess. Elena was confused when she heard these words, a mess? Why? The Duke ordered the counting machine to be brought out. What was he going to do? If it's a counting machine, it looks like a sword training tool. Use a sword to hit the designated points. A simple structure consisting of numbers on paper to move around. This would create an advantage by allowing you to train and count the number of movements at the same time, but this thing is famous for its boredom because you have to repeat the same movement over and over again. So why did the Duke make Sirius use this thing? The Duke took the sword and demonstrated a few moves. He was very authoritative. Elena had to gasp in admiration. He was so talented, he was like a perfect example book. Then he ordered Sirius to start. Sirius began to get into position. He slowly raised his sword. Then he swung a powerful slash at the machine. Elena was stunned. She could see that compared to the wooden dolls just now, it was much harder. Even if Sirius used all his strength, you could tell without even saying a word. What would the Duke say when he saw this? But contrary to expectations, the scary red color emanated from him again. He threatened Sirius that there was no room for fools. With that, he reached out as if to grab Sirius. Elena was horrified by this attitude. She fell to the ground, unable to believe her eyes. Witnessing that scene, her body trembled with no strength left. She didn't know this would happen. If she had known, she wouldn't have come here in the first place. Being punished by the Duke for so many years was enough to scare her just by looking from the second floor. The Duke's words echoed in her ears, causing her to jump. She was cut off as if those words were directed straight at her hand. She covered her face and ran away. Let's go back to the room quickly. That way she won't have to see it anymore. She didn't need to tremble like this, but her body had been weak for a long time. Back in her attic room. She stretched out on the bed. But now her stomach was protesting again. She was so hungry. Elena complained, even though I had lunch, I shouldn't have skipped dinner. I wish I had something to eat here. Then unconsciously, she worried about Sirius again. He hadn't eaten anything either, and she hadn't heard him come back yet. But surely he'll be fine. It's clearly written in the book that no matter how the Duke punishes him, he won't be shaken. Anyway, it's impossible to write down everything in it. And there are a lot of things that happen that are not in the rules. Everything that is written in it is true, so this time she just needs to worry about herself. But time is the medicine for fear. The fear she always used to be afraid of is gradually disappearing. Suddenly, there was a slamming door that broke her train of thought. She sat up from the next room. Oh, Sirius is back. Is he late? Or is he being trained until now? Elena complained to herself, the walls are so thin. I can hear the sounds from the next room. Even though she couldn't see it, she could imagine Sirius groaning and falling face down on the bed. He must be exhausted. The Duke is a person who doesn't know when to stop. Although according to the novel, it doesn't matter how cruelly Sirius is killed because the Emperor has given the 5-point decree and the price to go with it. She sat listening to the other room. Why is it so quiet? Is he asleep? But then Sirius's groaning voice came out. Every sound of his made Elena jump. She was so worried. Why would he make a sound like that, whether he was awake or asleep? Elena quickly got out of bed. She couldn't ignore him. If something happened to him, what would she do? She wanted to help him. But wait, the main character can't die like that. He will survive and grow up normally in the future. Elena clenched her fist, but what if he couldn't? He was in a lot of pain right now. Was it okay to leave him alone like this? He had cried last night, but she had pretended not to know. But she couldn't just let it go like this anymore. She couldn't stand by and watch anymore. She told herself it wasn't out of guilt or anything else, but just that Sirius was her insurance. She cheered herself up, that's right, he's just like my insurance. If he dies here or something happens to him, it's going to be a lot of trouble. I don't have any other choice. With that in mind, she knocked on Sirius's door, but there was only silence in response. She was confused. There was no reaction at all. She didn't know whether she was lucky or unlucky. But it was funny, she wanted to help, but she had to be careful and do it in secret. But there was no other way. There was nothing more terrifying than remembering what she had done because his mental state was not normal. His life was full of revenge and madness, and then he would return to the Empire and slaughter many people. Not only the Emperor, the main culprit, harmed himself, but he was also the only one who treated him well as a child. In fact, that guy had betrayed and reported Sirius's whereabouts to the Emperor, and he was the one who had poisoned his food. Because Sirius had known this since he was a child, he was very wary of people who helped him for no reason. If she thought about it, she of course had a reason to help, but she couldn't just tell him straight out that he was her insurance. But she had come this far. So she'll just check a little bit. She gently opened the door and looked inside the room. She peered into the room, but it was too dark to see anything, and there was no movement either. She groped her way inside, thinking to herself that if his condition was serious, she would secretly bring him medicine. But she was completely shocked by the scene before her. Sirius was lying curled up with his body full of injuries on the floor. He groaned in pain. Elena was horrified, wondering what on earth her father had done to him. She hurriedly rushed over to ask if he was okay. The protagonist was in so much pain that he couldn't even answer her anymore. If it weren't for his groans, she would have thought he was dead. Elena felt his forehead and it seemed like he had a fever. Oh my goodness, I can't believe he's so feverish. How can he survive in this condition? She didn't think he could endure it, so she quickly left to find help. She ran to the door and went back to her room, bringing along a towel and warm water. Oh right, and fever medicine too. Even though everyone in the mansion treated her like a ghost, when she had a fever, she was treated according to the Duke's orders, so she had medicine. She felt lucky to still have enough fever medicine. She grabbed the medicine bottle. In truth, even in her dreams, she didn't expect to be so lucky. But given the current situation, she didn't have time to think. She had to hurry back. Elena prayed silently, hoping Sirius wouldn't die. Elena rushed back to Sirius's room with her arms full. She told herself she had to be very careful, otherwise he might wake up. He couldn't wake up in this condition. She used all her strength to turn him over. Seeing his current state, she felt immense sorrow. His entire body was covered in blood and mud. Although Elena already knew this, her father was truly insane. Looking at the pair of hands that were covered in purple bruises, it was clear that they had been squeezed by the scabbard countless times, hundreds, if not thousands, of times. She hurriedly remembered that there was disinfectant in her room. She had to go get it quickly. She had to take care of Sirius first. She needed to bring his fever down, so she wet a towel and wiped him gently. Sirius groaned in pain. Even just looking at him, it was obvious that he was in a lot of pain. Elena whispered to him, "Endure it a little longer, okay?" After wiping him down, all she needed was some antipyretics. She took out her bottle of antipyretics and poured it into the young man's mouth. Since he was unconscious, half of the medicine she had poured into his mouth spilled out, but he had swallowed some of it, so it should be fine. Elena told herself that she would continue to use a damp towel to wipe him down until his fever subsided. As she wiped him down, she coaxed him, "Just a little more, okay? You'll be feeling better soon." A while later, Sirius's condition had improved. He began to breathe more evenly. Elena was exhausted and collapsed to the ground. His fever was gone now, and his breathing was easier. Of course, his body temperature was still the priority, but what about Sirius's swollen hands? She took out a jar of some kind of liquid and applied it to his hands. It wouldn't take away his pain, but it was better than not applying anything at all. Almost his entire arm was badly injured, so Elena had to apply the medicine in many places. She had to be careful and apply it gently. Suddenly, Sirius groaned again and trembled violently. He started crying again. Looking at Sirius like that, she felt a pang of pain in her heart. She knelt down beside him and asked softly, "Why are you crying?" The Sirius she knew was not the weak kind in a situation like this. Just like in the royal palace, it was filled with hostility. But even more cruel, and to prove it, Sirius had made up his mind to take care of the violence and abuse in this place himself. But you're not alone anymore. No one reached out to him. Was he crying because he felt safe? Seeing him like that, Elena felt suffocated. Let him cry out loud. She hoped he wouldn't be so sad anymore, although she had never felt so bad before. The protagonist of the novel was a young madman. Looking at Sirius crying like this now, Elena felt like he was so small and harmless. She reached out and gently touched his hand. Then she took hold of his trembling hand. As a result, Sirius stopped crying and calmed down. She thought to herself that she should leave before he woke up. She didn't know why, but she felt it was really hard to let go of his hand. So she held Sirius's hand for a little longer, just a little longer. The next morning, the sky was clear and the birds were singing. Elena woke up and stretched after a tiring night. It was not until midnight last night that she was able to run back to her room. "Well, let's go to breakfast. I hope nothing special happens to me today." But as soon as the door opened, Sirius was sitting outside her room waiting for her. Elena was very worried. Was yesterday's story a dream or something? Why did she feel like today was going to be an ordinary day? She asked Sirius if he had slept well. The boy didn't say anything with a serious face. Looking into his eyes, she broke out in a cold sweat. What was the matter with him staring at her like that? It was like he was giving her the side eye. Then suddenly, Sirius asked why Elena was late today. This question startled Elena a little. She stammered and made up an excuse that she stayed up late last night and overslept. This excuse didn't fall on Sirius's deaf ears. The poor girl tried to make him believe her, but it wasn't easy. But strangely enough, Elena wondered why he asked that. This made Sirius jump. He stuttered and didn't explain clearly. Elena was a little puzzled as to why the tense atmosphere suddenly disappeared. Sirius acted as if nothing had happened and casually invited her to breakfast together. He walked away first, muttering to himself, even if you want to relax, don't relax too much. Elena pondered his strange behavior. Of course, his face and hair were a mess from yesterday's events, so he must have been suspicious of how he woke up completely clean. And since she was next to his room, it was natural that he would suspect Elena. She reassured herself not to worry. After all, Sirius didn't have any clues. He didn't open his eyes yesterday either, and there was no sign of him waking up. If Sirius had noticed her even in that state, he must be a god or something. Then how would he know it was her? But watching him made Elena feel a little uneasy. He looked a little unsteady but still conscious. Compared to yesterday, it was like a miracle. She was proud of herself for taking care of him. She wasn't sure if he had the demonic power of self-healing. But anyway, she felt a great sense of relief. The two of them walked to the dining room together. Elena said bon appetit and started to eat. Then the room fell silent. As she ate, she thought about how worried she had been about Sirius when she arrived, but nothing special had happened. He hadn't even said anything when she brought him food. Was Sirius going to continue ignoring her like this? Then, without a word, Sirius slammed his spoon down on the table. He told her to follow him if she was done eating. Elena was confused. Was he asking her to follow him? She asked again, confused, what do you mean? Sirius frowned in annoyance. He didn't even bother to explain and turned to leave. Elena was confused. What was wrong with him? He didn't even say anything else. She didn't want to follow him at all. But she had no choice, so she turned and followed him. The scene changed to the outside of the mansion, where there were many training equipment. Elena was scared again. Where did he want to take her? The shooting range? You've got to be kidding me. Sirius turned back and told her to stay here and wait until he was done and came back. Her heart screamed, why do I have to do this? She clenched her fists, even though she wanted to say that. But what if Sirius noticed what happened yesterday? All her efforts would go to waste. She complained, why do I always have to help him secretly, even if it's for a good cause? Because Sirius is the most powerful madman in this world, always finding fault, not just one or two things, but doing everything right. He's such a nuisance. Is he going to threaten me to do everything he wants? I've had enough. I'm going to say it all at once. She forced a smile and pointed to the side and asked if she could sit there until then. After she finished speaking, she stood up herself. How much longer would she have to put up with this guy? This was a good opportunity to run into her father while wandering around this shooting range. She was very worried. She didn't know what would happen, but she hated that. In fact, she was scared right now. Because her father often came here. He looked at her trembling and didn't know what to say. Then he agreed to Elena's request. Elena secretly cheered in her heart. Excellent. Without wasting any more time, she dashed off like a whirlwind. Running out of the shooting range, she sat down under a tree. She breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness Sirius allowed her to do that. She recalled the way he had stared at her earlier when he agreed to her request. Just like the first time they met. But now it didn't feel as painful as before. What good is it to be useful? On the contrary, useful people tend to get caught up in troublesome situations, just like how she could freely ride the bus instead of driving it. And of course, it would be even better if she didn't have to get on that bus at all. Unfortunately, words can't be as good as expected. Moreover, if she repeated the reckless actions from yesterday, Sirius would know it was her who lost it. However, everything was still going the way she wanted. If she could complete the work that was half done yesterday, everything would be fine. At this moment, she felt a bit tired because she hadn't slept at all last night due to taking care of Sirius. Now she was very sleepy and decided to take a short nap. She gradually fell asleep with vague consciousness. The grass on the ground smelled so fresh, and the flowers were fragrant too. But thinking about the smell of blood, she suddenly woke up. Sirius, covered in blood, suddenly appeared in front of her. She was stunned. Since when did he get so close to her? But looking at his bloody body, where was he injured? However, the light emanating from him seemed like he was more excited than usual. Suddenly, Sirius reached out his hand towards her. She was startled. What was this? Why did he suddenly reach out to her? He kept staring at her. Did he want her to hold his hand? She hesitantly extended her hand. Sirius quickly grabbed her hand. She felt shy. What was wrong with him? But she couldn't let his mood drop. Elena silently lamented that he made her so embarrassed, while Sirius remained silent, staring at her. Then he asked if his hand was cold. Elena, flustered, denied it, saying it wasn't cold at all. Then why did he ask? Why did she keep trying to push his hand away? Her awkward smile was just one of her natural instincts trying to run away from danger, but she couldn't tell him the truth that he was driving her crazy. What should she do if she didn't answer soon? Would he be angry with her? She forced herself to say something, anything. Then she spoke with difficulty. She smiled and said that she was just trying to pat his head. After saying that, she was embarrassed herself that she could spew out such meaningless words with a calm face. God, it was just so meaningless. She had to save it. Elena stammered and continued that she just wanted to praise Sirius because he had worked so hard. This made Sirius dumbfounded. He knelt down beside her. His face was as bright as the sun, telling Elena to praise him quickly. She looked intently at the boy in front of her and his actions. She didn't realize what he had just done. What was that warm smile? Was he crazy? Hurry up and wipe off his blood. That's what she wanted to say to Sirius right now, but... Unbelievable, she reached out and patted Sirius's head and praised him for doing a great job. This made her scared to death. She couldn't stop shaking now. How much longer did she have to pat his head? Looking at Sirius's attitude, she wondered if he was unhappy with her. Then Sirius asked her if she saw that too. What did he want to ask after all? Sirius turned and said it was hard to understand, so it seemed like it was real. Tuak seemed surprised to see him at the shooting range. She breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that Sirius was about to start the conversation. He told her that the knight in charge of teaching today had stared at him with a surprised look on his face. She thought to herself that it sounded reasonable, because after all, what was the difference between being called to participate in yesterday's training and being tortured? Who would have imagined that he could still stand up straight after what happened yesterday? Sirius continued that so he decided not to attend today's class. Instead, he chose to fight a monster that the knights had captured for a new training method. And of course, with his current appearance, the winner was Sirius. She listened to the story and stared at him. So that was why there was blood all over him. She couldn't imagine a one-on-one battle with the monster. She looked at him with a puzzled expression. Suddenly, he stared at her face, making her jump in surprise. What did he want her to do after all? After hesitating, he started to frown. Then he stood up abruptly from the tree stump. Finally, he turned his back and walked away without saying another word. Elena was annoyed. He made her wait for nothing and then left without a word. His attitude left her speechless. But the most important thing was that she happily threw herself onto the bed. She was free. Elena lay on her bed feeling incredibly happy. She had rushed back to her room as soon as Sirius left. She couldn't believe that he had left without showing any dissatisfaction. But it was a good thing that he didn't mention what happened yesterday. She thought to herself that Sirius was just human after all. If he had lost consciousness, how could he recognize the person standing next to him without opening his eyes? If he knew, he wouldn't be human anymore. She closed her eyes and enjoyed the relaxation. He couldn't possibly recognize that it was her. She smugly thought that she had committed the perfect crime. But just a few days later, she had to regret her recklessness. There was one thing she had forgotten: Sirius was more than human. Wolf blood flowed through his veins, and he couldn't be like a normal person. And one more thing worth mentioning is that once again, the perpetrator returned to the scene of the crime. Elena once again came to Sirius's bed. Elena had gathered information from the maid and summarized the events that led to his current condition. Under the orders of the Duke, Sirius was trained to increase his swordsmanship skills at an unimaginable rate. His physical strength was incredible. Based on what she heard, even when he reached his limits, he still tried to get up and appear on the training ground on time the next day. Gifted with special talent and incredible diligence, he became more and more prominent. Many people called him a genius without hesitation. Nozuku also became more curious and wanted to know more about him. That's why Joseph, who specialized in swordsmanship, began to become more gloomy and uneasy day by day. In that situation, the Duke ordered him and Sirius to have a one-on-one duel. The Duke was curious to see who would win, while Joseph was a little dumbfounded. The fear of losing to an amateur who had only picked up a sword a few days ago drove him mad. So, before the countdown to end the fight, Joseph decided to suddenly rush forward and attack Sirius. Sirius subdued the foolish attack. Although he knew that Joseph had violated the rules, the Duke let the fight continue. That's why Sirius fell into chaos and kept staring at the Duke. His opponent cheated, and even though Sirius managed to block the attack, Joseph's sharp sword pierced his waist. Sirius fell to his knees and cried out in pain. But the Duke sneered, "You almost dodged the boy's sword. What a pity." The Duke declared the match over and that Joseph had violated the rules and would be punished. And before leaving, the Duke praised Sirius, saying that he was not bad. What was that compliment supposed to mean? But it was a good thing that he lost consciousness this time. Elena came to take care of him again. She thought to herself that it was really difficult for her to overcome this obstacle. She had come here unconsciously. Looking at the wound on Sirius's body, he had managed to bandage it himself, but the wound was still bleeding because the bandage was not done properly. Elena had eavesdropped from the maid. She could ask directly what had happened, but she didn't want to make a mistake. There was no one in the infirmary, so she had no other choice. She pressed Sirius's wound. Perhaps this was Joseph's plan. He had sent all the doctors away. Elena guessed that he would get a lesson from Sirius when he grew up anyway. Just a few more years. Elena wished Sirius could stay at the Duke's mansion with her. She knew that her childhood was filled with misfortune and sadness, but after all, it was written in the book. But the pain she had endured could not be summed up in 2 words of sadness. Even if Sirius was serious, he would die if the wound became infected. She looked at him worriedly. Didn't he say he would get revenge on all of them? She encouraged him to endure until then. Looking at Sirius at this moment, she couldn't hold back her tears. She thought it wasn't time for Sirius to die yet. The wound was bleeding more than she thought, so she had to go find more bandages. She was about to turn and look for bandages when suddenly her hand was held back. Elena was startled and surprised. Sirius had woken up and grabbed her hand. He stared at her. He was still alive? Elena was terrified when she looked at him. It was too dangerous. She had to get out of here quickly, but her hand was held tightly, so she couldn't move. Sirius asked her what she meant. She was worried because she had made a mistake and now there was no excuse left. She tried to run away, but Sirius pulled her hand back tightly. She was pulled forward by him. She worried that if she fell on him, his wound would. So she fell onto him in an extremely intimate position. She breathed a sigh of relief that she hadn't made the wound worse, but this position made her heart beat a little too fast. Their faces were close together, their eyes locked, with no escape route. She was very embarrassed. What should she do now? She couldn't just tell him that it was just a misunderstanding. What was she supposed to do? She couldn't think of anything. Suddenly, she used both hands to cover Sirius's eyes. She hypnotized him, murmuring that it was just a dream. Sirius was confused by her actions. Then suddenly, he broke into a laugh that had never been seen before. She was stunned. Did he just laugh? Elena was about to do something a little strange, but she had no other choice. She repeated the dream over and over again, saying it was all a dream. She whispered, "You will soon forget this dream in the morning. It's still evening, so go back to sleep." Sirius listened to these words and tried to hold back his laughter. Elena didn't give up. She continued to hypnotize him that it was just a dream. Sirius gradually cooperated. He became silent. Then he slowly released her hands. Then he pretended to fall back asleep. Seeing this, Elena took her hands away and observed him. Is he really asleep? She was a little confused. She couldn't believe it. She thought maybe she could become a hypnotist in the future. Elena slowly got out of bed. She thought it was safe now. She had to go back to her room. But she paused for a second. But is she really out of danger now? Sirius suddenly woke up during treatment and of course saw her face clearly. Moreover, Sirius's eyes were looking at her now, a helper for no reason, so she had to be really vigilant. She held her head in pain because if she followed the rules in the novel, she might be dead by now. But in the end, he burst out laughing and fell asleep. Or was he laughing at her lame excuse? Based on the light that came out when he laughed, maybe she had nothing to worry about. But she was so scared earlier that she didn't notice his expression. She worried that she had no choice but to run away. She started rummaging through her suitcase. Where could a 10-year-old like her live right now? She pounded the herbs while thinking that if the Duke was really bad, she wouldn't have to worry about necessities if she lived here. But she looked back at Sirius with a worried expression. He looked better now, but he was still pale. She started mixing the herbs with the medicine, opened it again, and applied it to his wound. Finally, she changed him because Sirius had to be alive to escape the Duke's family. And she would run away. She would do everything in her power to take care of him. After finishing everything, she quickly ran away from the room. She was just a small role in this novel. The only thing she could do was cause trouble and become useless. This had to end as soon as possible. She had to run before Sirius woke up and bit her. She ran back to her room and closed the door. Elena felt lucky that she had eyes and a needle. When something strange happened, she would run away from this place without hesitation. The next day, she had just come up with a plan, but now she didn't dare open the door to her room. Just as she predicted, Sirius was waiting for her in front of the door. She didn't think her plan would fall apart so soon. Time goes back a bit ago. She was sitting on the floor. After she woke up in the morning, she quickly looked for something valuable in the room, but of course, there was nothing valuable in this room. The most valuable thing she had was some medicine and herbs to use when she was sick. The important thing is, who would buy medicine from a 10-year-old? She thought she was lucky that Sirius wouldn't kill her right away. She still had a little time to prepare. The reason is quite simple. No matter who he is, if he dared to kill the Duke's youngest daughter, he would be kicked out immediately. Since he is also a 10-year-old child, he wouldn't survive the harsh winter cold. Therefore, there's no choice but to forgive her. She nodded in agreement with her thoughts. Then she stood up and walked to the door. She still had time to prepare, so before starting her work, she needed to have breakfast. She intended to open the door. But something felt strange. Where did the smell of blood come from? In front of her was a pair of blood-stained boots. She froze. What was this? Sirius was sitting on the windowsill and asked her if she had slept well. She breathed a sigh of relief. Sirius had scared her, but then he greeted her good morning as usual? But wait, she was astonished at her thoughts. How could it be usual? She observed his condition. Based on the bloodstains in the hallway and on the ice, what happened yesterday wasn't a dream. She worried, wasn't it just a small wound? She guessed with that wound, he should rest for at least a week or more. The wound was severe enough to kill him. But more importantly, the strangest thing was. Looking at Sirius, he seemed very happy. It wasn't a fake smile either, because there was a warm light radiating from around him. How could that be? Sirius turned and urged her to follow him. Elena thought to herself that he indeed had bizarre healing abilities and a complex mood that she couldn't understand. As she walked, she thought to herself that if something strange happened, she would run away. Who would have thought she would encounter such weirdness? She even thought he was giving her a murderous look. But on the contrary, Sirius was now looking at her and smiling cheerfully. She slowly backed away, hoping to take advantage of Sirius's distraction to quietly leave and escape from this place. But she couldn't do it because Sirius was with her. She was like a pet with no other choice but to follow Sirius. Noticing her strangeness, Sirius turned around and asked her if she had anything to say to him. She gasped. Oh my God. He repeated the question, do you have anything to say to me? She waved her hand hastily and denied, no, sir. I think it would be better if I diverted his attention. She was so embarrassed that her whole body stiffened. She urged him, aren't you hungry? Hurry up before it's too late. Looking at her now, both her left and right hands were moving at the same time. How funny. And so, once again, Sirius couldn't hide his smile and agreed. A moment later, the two arrived at the dining hall. Sirius was helping her get food and plates. Elena was stunned. This made her crazy and wanted to cry. She wondered why Sirius was treating her like this. This breaks the character setting. Sirius wouldn't be as kind and sweet as he is now. Not only that, but he also wished her bon appetit while eating. She ate while thinking, why wasn't he more wary? In fact, his mood seemed to be even better after she talked to him again. Or was he really treating what happened yesterday as a dream? But then she couldn't explain why he suddenly became so friendly. 1,000 thoughts ran through Elena's head. She thought there was no way she could eat in this situation. Of course, she didn't like pea soup, but she didn't want to eat it anyway. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door in the dining room. The two were puzzled. Who would come during a meal? A servant pushed in a food cart. She said, "Excuse me for disturbing you while you are enjoying your meal, Your Excellency. The Duke has prepared this for Your Highness to use to recover from your wounds." It's food? The Duke's high-quality food is amazing. Sirius being treated means the Duke has acknowledged him, and yesterday was a reward. She was very upset because she thought that if so, the Duke should have sent medicine yesterday. Even though he was her father, he was really indifferent. Looking at the food that was brought in, it was very attractive. The Duke had sent steak to the patient, someone who had been stabbed yesterday. Looking at the food, Elena was very greedy. She really wanted to try it, but she warned herself to wake up and not stare at it anymore. Back to the bowl of pea soup, that luxurious piece of meat is not hers. She must quickly finish her own food. However, another piece of meat appeared on her plate. Sirius invited her to eat the meat. Looking at the glistening, delicious piece of meat in front of her, Elena couldn't help herself. She hesitated. Could she eat it? It really looked so attractive that she wanted to eat it. And finally, unable to resist, she took the meat. She thought, whatever, she didn't care, he gave it to her, so she just ate it. The exquisite taste exploded all of Elena's senses. She was extremely excited because the meat was so delicious. Looking at Elena, Sirius smiled again. Then he spoke a sentence that made Elena pale. You appeared in my dream. She was confused, but she calmed down. Should she pretend? She nervously looked around, wondering why Sirius brought up this topic out of the blue. Did he want to warn her that he remembered what happened last night? She wondered if he was warning her. Sirius continued to give her meat and said, on second thought, I think this isn't the first time you've appeared in my dream. Sirius recounted how she had taken his hand in his dream, which made her sweat. She ate while thinking, so Sirius was still conscious that time. After all, it was the second night Sirius had arrived. At that time, he was groaning as if he was about to die after that exhausting training session, and she was afraid that something might happen to him, so she went to take care of him. She had held his hand for a while because he was crying in pain at that time. If Sirius didn't care too much about it, the little problem would have been forgotten during the day, but why did he remember it? Seeing that Elena was still silent, Sirius reminded her, why aren't you saying anything? She was confused and glanced at Sirius stealthily. Thinking about it, this was the first time she had talked to Sirius for so long. She was a little hesitant because she felt unfamiliar, but she thought, should I say it or not? But then, somehow she thought everything would be okay, so she asked Sirius about the dream. How was it? Sirius was silent and thoughtful. Then he replied, a beautiful dream, which confused Elena. She asked again, just a beautiful dream? Sirius confirmed it. Elena pondered, that's strange. It can't be a beautiful dream. He must be talking about a different dream. She was tormented by her thoughts, while Sirius kept giving her food. She pouted and didn't take it. But then the plate of food was back in front of her. He watched her eat with an angry expression. Sirius thought, Elena looks like she wants to say that I keep giving her food but I don't answer her properly about her dream. Sirius judged, why do you want to express everything on your face? But Sirius thought, I already answered, didn't I? It was a nightmare at the beginning. But what he had always wanted had come true. He smiled brightly at her. A line of carriages followed each other on the road. The road led to the Duke's mansion. The first day Sirius arrived at the Duke's mansion, he was filled with hope. Because he was finally free from that horrible palace. He was just a prince in name but actually a wolf. He had to struggle to survive without being killed by his half-brother. Even though he knew the food was poisoned. He still tried to eat it because he was very hungry. So Sirius, with the excitement of a new life just before his eyes. He hoped to be like everyone else, to live an ordinary life. Those hopes filled his mind. He dreamed of waking up each morning and saying good morning, eating a normal meal that was not poisoned together. Then playing and studying with people his own age, and being able to sleep comfortably at night. And if possible, Sirius wanted someone to hold him close and say good night. The carriage brought him to the Duke. Looking at the man in front of him, Sirius knew those ordinary hopes. The Duke, with his stern and gloomy appearance, had dashed Sirius's hopes. It was the familiar look that he couldn't help but notice. Whether it was in the royal palace or the Duke's mansion, it was all the same nightmare. The Duke led him around the mansion with the eyes of a poisonous snake looking down on his toy. The other members of the Duke's family were all the same. Sirius couldn't stop noticing the malice in their eyes. So malice and hostility would be met with malice and hostility. That's how Sirius had survived in the royal palace, and he was determined to do the same in the Duke's mansion. The servant informed him that his room was ready on the upper floor. Sirius thought to himself that no matter where he went, he would be treated the same. The emperor would never send him to a good place. He blamed himself for not knowing from the beginning. He asked the servants why they had brought him here, but then he realized that asking them was useless. He wearily dismissed them. Sirius was completely disappointed and thought that he should not have hoped for anything from the beginning. But suddenly, he heard the sound of the door opening. Looking at the door moving in front of him, he wondered if it was opening or if it was the wind. He carefully took hold of the doorknob. Suddenly, Elena appeared abruptly and fell towards him. He stared at her, puzzled by the appearance of this girl in front of him. It was their first meeting. Elena appeared with sparkling golden eyes, the most like the Duke of all the others. But she was also the one who didn't fit in with the Duke's family at all. She was Elena. From the first time they met, Sirius found her quite interesting. He had caught her following him back to his room. He thought it was quite funny, so he teased her a little, and her face turned bright red. I don't know why, but Sirius felt quite happy at that moment and he couldn't help but laugh. But because he didn't show much emotion, Elena didn't know about it. Then Sirius asked her if she had anything to say to him. Unexpectedly, she said the very thing Sirius had long wanted to hear: she wished him good night. This made Sirius pause for a moment, a sense of joy flashed through him, and then it immediately disappeared. That feeling wasn't too bad for him either. But the feeling of being a little out of it was similar to surprise. He went into his room and plopped down on the bed. His heart pounded as he thought back to the moment she had wished him good night. It was the first time Sirius had ever received such a greeting, so he was quite surprised. He lay on the bed thinking about what he had done and feeling really rude. He blamed himself for barging into someone else's room and staring at them. What's more, he had called her useless without even thinking about it. He had been taught to despise useless things and discard them. But even so, she had wished him good night. He was very thoughtful, thinking that even though it was just a subconscious wish, it was still the most decent wish he had ever received. The feeling of loneliness made this place a little different from when Sirius was in the royal palace. So that's why one of his wishes had come true. He reminded himself that he didn't need to dwell on sad memories because he had never shown weakness before. No need to feel sad. Right now he noticed something. He looked at Elena, who seemed a little sad, and quickly asked her what was the matter. Then he urged her that the food would get cold, so eat quickly. Elena frowned again in thought. She really couldn't understand. Sirius still seemed to be very happy, but why was his aura now turning blue and sad? She speculated that it was because she was too picky about the food he gave her, but what could she do? She was really sick of it. She stared at Sirius. Watching him now, she really didn't know what he was thinking. Elena reassured herself that it wasn't a big deal. She took the glass and drank her water quickly. But because she was in a hurry, she choked. This made Sirius jump up in worry. He asked her anxiously if she was okay. Elena replied that she just choked on water. Sirius quickly came to her side and patted her on the back. Elena was surprised that he was here so soon. It wasn't like she was sick or anything that needed checking. She avoided telling Sirius that she was fine. Sirius asked eagerly what had happened. Were you sick? Looking at his expression, Elena couldn't understand. Was he worried about her now? She waved her hand hastily and explained that it was because she had drunk too much water. But Sirius didn't seem to understand. He made a face that made Elena tired and secretly blamed him for not having to pretend to not understand. Compared to her, a person who had just been stabbed in the waist could walk around normally, which was more strange. Then suddenly, Sirius blurted out, "You're really weak." Elena complained that it was just because he was too strong, but she still smiled on the outside and explained that she had been quite weak since birth, but she thought it was quite normal. And Sirius stared at his wound. He knew he was about to recover, thanks to his werewolf healing ability. He knew that normal people were weak. But Elena looked weak and useless in his eyes. But maybe that was a good thing. She was weak, but she tried to help Sirius. He looked at her thoughtfully. Actually, ever since the night she came to his room, he remembered everything. Kindness doesn't come without a reason. But when she took his hand, and even took care of him all night, he was very puzzled by her actions. Then he spoke up and asked, "Shouldn't you take medicine if you're sick? I think there's a lot of medicine in your room." She startled and retorted that she wasn't sick enough to need medicine, but wait, something was wrong. She was very confused as to how Sirius knew that. Did he remember those things, or was he just pretending? Thinking about it, she thought it would be wise to run away now, so she quickly made an excuse that she had to go back to her room. But she was called back by Sirius with a sunny face and smile. He asked her if she wanted to watch him train. The scene shifts to the shooting range. Elena, just like that, followed Sirius here. Because for a Sirius who was smiling in a good mood, she couldn't say no. Then she told herself she had made the right choice. Even though she didn't know what Sirius was thinking, at least she shouldn't make him sad. Unlike last time, she was glad he didn't take her into the training ground. Sirius agreed to the suggestion to let her wait outside. And so she watched him train in this forest. Actually, Sirius is still quite small at this time. Nor can he be said to be weak, because Sirius can tear people apart. Then a scream brings her back to reality. In front of her is Joseph. She shouted back, "What's the matter?" making him startle. This also inadvertently annoyed him, so he asked angrily why Elena dared to talk to him like that. Elena thought to herself that he was still seen as something untouchable in this house. When will he realize that even if he is recognized by his father, it is useless? After Sirius wipes out the Duke's family, the hierarchy of the Road family will all be wiped out. Seeing her stunned, he got angry and shouted, "Why aren't you answering me anymore? You're getting more and more arrogant. Are you here to watch me be punished?" Elena had just noticed that he was wearing the uniform of a guard as punishment for breaking the rules in a duel. Now he had to live the life of a guard for a few days. Elena sighed when she thought about this punishment. Then she replied to him, "Why would I come here to see you? I'm not going to do such stupid things." Hearing this, he got a little annoyed and threw all the wooden stakes he was holding to the ground. Then he stepped forward and threatened her, "You don't even call me Big Brother anymore, do you? How dare you ignore me, you little thing?" Seeing Elena back away a little, he asked smugly, "Are you scared? Even if you kneel down and beg for forgiveness now." But Elena ignored him and looked at something behind him. This made him very uncomfortable. But suddenly, Joseph shivered a little. It turned out that Sirius was slowly approaching from behind him. Sirius appeared with an emotionless face. Seeing this, Joseph stuttered and asked, "Could it be that the person I see is Sirius?" Elena emphasized, "You must call him Your Highness, not him." Joseph's face turned pale and he couldn't believe his eyes. Actually, Elena was also surprised at first. She couldn't believe it either when she saw Sirius moving normally in the morning, but she didn't quite understand it either. She thought to herself, Joseph is being scolded now for not treating him like his brother. I just acted like a little sister and gave him advice, but I don't think he'll listen to me. Joseph rushed over and grabbed Sirius by the shoulder because he couldn't believe it. Elena was terrified to see this. Has her brother gone crazy? What is he thinking of putting his hand on Sirius? He is not someone who can be treated like a normal person. She worried about what she had to do to avoid seeing blood. But Sirius coldly asked Joseph, "Since when have you had the right to touch Sirius?" Hearing this, the older brother immediately turned pale and withdrew his hand. Joseph clenched his fist, trembling. Sirius's eyes were cold and indifferent. Then Sirius continued, "Unless Joseph had something to say, he should get out of his sight." Hearing this made Joseph angry enough to shake. Unable to contain himself any longer, he raised his hand in the air. But this action was stopped by the appearance of the Duke. Everyone was petrified at the sight of the Duke. Duke Road appeared and sealed off everyone here. The Duke stepped forward and questioned Sirius, saying that he had told him to rest after training, but now he still hadn't left the training area. Elena trembled and lowered her head. The Duke's voice was now cold and indifferent, unlike before, but if she had known he was coming, she would not have waited for Sirius. She pressed her lips together in fear. She had had a bad feeling since morning, and she guessed that today was going to be a bad day, and she was right. But she didn't think it was Sirius's fault. When he brought her here, he didn't know the Duke was coming either. Then suddenly, a figure appeared in front of her. It was Sirius, standing in front of her and saying that he was just talking to Joseph for a while. Looking at that small back, he was trying to protect her from the Duke. When the Duke appeared, Sirius had noticed her. Noticed her fear and trembling. The Duke asked what they had been talking about for so long. Sirius explained that he had just asked a few questions, but Joseph hadn't answered, so it took so long. The Duke put on an interested and amused expression and asked what the two had been talking about. Because compared to a normal conversation between a bunch of kids, the situation just now was much more intense. Then the Duke turned to Joseph and yelled at him to answer quickly. This made Joseph shrink. He didn't dare to answer and tried to get away with it, but the Duke didn't allow it. Joseph's face was as pale as a ghost, stammering and speechless. Then he repeated Sirius's question, asking since when has he been allowed to talk to Sirius without using honorifics. The Duke heard this and murmured with interest. His aura was now filled with curiosity and interest, but it didn't seem quite right, so it made Elena want to get closer. Then the Duke called Joseph to follow him. So the two left Elena alone in the forest. Elena thought it was lucky that she wasn't involved in the conversation. Suddenly, her arm was grabbed. Sirius was trying to pull her away from here. Elena was confused. Where was she going? But she couldn't put it into words because she had to follow him no matter what happened, but she was also curious about where they were going. It seemed like they were just taking a walk, or maybe just wandering around without a destination. Usually, her head would be filled with thoughts of the Duke's appearance by now. But now, she could only think about peaceful moments like where she would go with Sirius, which made her feel much more comfortable. But something was wrong. She gasped at her own thoughts. Did she really feel comfortable being around Sirius? But she had felt that way before. When Sirius shielded her with his small back, unable to block the Duke's voice, and when he glanced at her. But somehow she felt a little safe. Was he helping her? Even though Sirius had caused her a lot of trouble, she was still grateful to him for trying to help her. But thinking about what would happen in the future, this was not a good development either. To make sure, she had told herself from the beginning to pretend she wasn't there, but at the same time. Suddenly, Sirius stopped and broke her train of thought. He turned around and asked Elena if there was anywhere she wanted to go. Elena also realized that he was not lost, but couldn't decide where he wanted to go. How silly, but she didn't have anywhere to go either. Then Sirius seemed to come up with a great idea and clapped his hands together, making Elena startle. She thought he was acting more like a child than she thought. He wasn't acting like he used to anymore. Sirius's face was also more relaxed than before. Was it because he was trying to act his age when he was with her? So does that mean her plan will be affected? She just stared blankly at him as he asked what she usually does when she has free time. She replied that she would go to the library to read. But she regretted it a little. She could guess that Sirius would ask her to go to the library with him. She was very tired. There was no way they would be stuck together all day, right? But they hadn't been apart since morning. She was determined not to let this happen. She didn't like the idea of being dragged into his mess just because she was around Sirius. So as soon as they arrived at the library, she made up all sorts of excuses. She called Sirius back and started talking nonstop. She said it took her a long time to choose a book, especially when someone was next to her. She was satisfied with the reason she gave and thought it would convince him to go back. But Sirius put on a pitiful look. Looking at him like that, Elena was driven crazy by this cuteness. When a child, or rather a wolf cub, was abandoned, he looked like a little abandoned wolf cub who wanted to be picked up. Elena came to her senses. No matter how cute Sirius was, he was still a cunning kid. How could she not be persuaded? She couldn't be swayed. But Sirius looked at her with a pitiful look and asked, "Am I not allowed to wait outside either?" Oh, my Elena, she was psychologically manipulated to respond like a robot. Yes, you can. She couldn't believe the words that had just come out of her mouth. Sirius regained his cheerful demeanor and said he would wait outside. Elena was captivated by his adorable appearance. Sirius suddenly complimented her, saying that she had a cute smile and looked beautiful. Elena was confused. Why did he say that? In other words, she liked whatever Sirius liked. That's right. Seeing his angelically adorable face, Elena secretly rejoiced that she had agreed to let him stay. She leaned against the door and was lost in thought. Then she suddenly froze for a few seconds. She hugged her head in worry. Suddenly, she realized how weak she was. She paced back and forth in a panic. Was she going crazy? Did she accidentally take some temporary crazy medicine when she had breakfast this morning? She was going crazy. She had done everything she could. She had dropped her guard when Sirius suddenly attacked, and even in retrospect, he was really cute then. But she had to keep a cool head. Sirius, the boy with the cute face. He will destroy the entire empire in the future. She told herself to be careful, but she had to be especially careful about what, but anyway, she had to be careful. So Sirius was physically capable of attacking, but he was also a master of trapping someone by attacking their mind. So even though he had killed so many of his fiancées, she wondered if he could get engaged again. Because of the Emperor's restraint over Sirius, he was forced to get engaged against his will to eliminate the opposition. He had seduced women before. Even if the girl doubted Sirius's intentions, she couldn't refuse the engagement because of Sirius's charm when he appeared. Not only that, but there was also someone who wanted to approach him to assassinate him. She hesitated at the critical moment because Sirius's presence was too precious to be killed, at least that's what the book said. Of course, Sirius killed her without mercy. After all, in this world, Sirius was the one who was never not handsome like Sirius. Even so, there was no description of him being cute as a child. His childhood in the novel was just a stepping stone to his future. It was full of hardship and misfortune, so there was no description of him being cute. She took a book while thinking that she and Sirius had come here anyway, so she just picked a random book. She sat down at the table and flipped through the pages hastily, flipping back and forth unconsciously. She didn't know if Sirius was waiting for her outside. She didn't want to get involved with Sirius, but she couldn't be so irresponsible. She put the book down and walked to the door. She decided to just look through the crack of the door to see if he was gone yet. It would be better if he was gone. But then she heard a voice calling her. The voice was Joseph, and he appeared full of resentment. She didn't know what was wrong with him after being called by his father, but she was sure he was very upset. Normally, he would just stop at cursing and making things difficult for her, but it was hard to deal with Joseph when he was really angry. Until this family falls, it's best for Elena to ignore and keep quiet so as not to change anything. That's how she lives here. Is it because someone finds this interesting that they jump in and make fun of her? Joseph is a prime example. Staying here will only bring more trouble, so Elena thinks she should leave, but Joseph is running out of patience. He hands her a black object and tells her to give it to Sirius. And he adds that it's a gift from the Duke. Curiously, she asks again what it is. But this angers Joseph. He is annoyed that she asks again and is about to hit her. He's such a hothead. Why would he throw it away? She screams in fear because she's scared. But nothing happens. What does this mean? Sirius once again steps in to protect her. She thought Sirius had left, but he was still here. But why are his cheeks red? Suddenly, he says sorry to her. Sirius apologizes with a pitiful look for making her wait outside but coming in. This makes Elena feel bad. She's the one who made him wait. She wants to apologize to him, so she slowly raises her hand. But Sirius suddenly calls her name, making her freeze. Sirius rubs her head and tells her to wait for him for a bit. She's stunned. Has something changed? Sirius turns around abruptly, scaring Joseph pale. Elena wondered if Joseph was looking at her while talking, or if he was indirectly trying to tell her something. Joseph quickly slipped away. But Sirius didn't want to let it go. He questioned Joseph, "You threw this at Elena and just left?" Sirius angrily threw the black object back at Joseph, startling him. Joseph, terrified, stammered, "So, should I apologize? I definitely didn't do that." Sirius's face was now terrifying, with sullen eyes and a sinister smile. He walked towards Joseph step by step, making him tremble. A foot was painted in the air. Unexpectedly, Sirius delivered a devastating kick to the other person. Joseph took a few steps back, clutching his chest in pain. Not stopping there, something else continued to fall on him. All the books came crashing down on Joseph. Elena looked at Sirius's back and gradually understood. Sirius's face was not red because he felt guilty, but because he was getting angry and his face was flushed. Joseph forced himself to stand up. He shouted, "That's nothing to me." Sirius still looked at him calmly. Joseph started to get angry because of Sirius's words. Sirius complimented him, "You took that hit better than I thought, Sirius. Keep it up next time." Joseph, agitated, lunged at Sirius. But his arm was grabbed by Sirius. Joseph trembled and froze. He didn't understand how this could happen. His arm wouldn't even budge. Joseph looked at Sirius, unable to understand how he could be completely overpowered. How could they have such different physical strength? Joseph felt like his wrist was about to fall off. He trembled and told Sirius to let go of his arm. But Sirius just sneered, "You have to do that." Sirius pushed Joseph down again. After this push, he didn't find this fun anymore. Looking at Joseph trembling, Sirius had only played with his arm a little bit and he was already about to kiss the floor. But he almost hurt Elena. Sirius took threatening steps. He thought to himself, how could Joseph dare to mess with someone who was Sirius's? Sirius beat Joseph to a pulp. He cowardly said, "Sorry, can I apologize properly now?" Sirius said nothing. He stepped on Joseph's arm. Joseph's tears streamed down his face. At this rate, his arm would be broken because Sirius kept stepping on it. He regretted saying he wouldn't apologize earlier and that he shouldn't have been rude to Sirius in the first place. Joseph sobbed and begged to apologize to Elena. He looked at Sirius with a cold and incomprehensible face. Why was he looking at the person he had just beaten with such a lifeless look? With a calm face and lifeless eyes, Sirius seemed to be analyzing something. But Joseph shivered when he understood the meaning of that look. Sirius was making sure that Joseph wouldn't faint, so he could torture him longer. But Sirius calmly said that Joseph could speak, as he didn't need his apology anyway. Words can be created as much as you want, as you wish, without having to spend too much effort on it. That's what Sirius learned when he was in the royal palace, so he will just walk up like that. But his foot stopped for a moment. Now that he has dealt with Joseph as he wants, he also has to listen to Elena's opinion, so Sirius turns back and tells her that he is sure Joseph will not do anything bad without thinking about her. But Sirius is startled to see Elena's state at this moment. She is scared, hugging her head and trembling. Seeing that, Sirius quickly runs to her and asks her with concern if she is hurt anywhere, but Elena becomes even more afraid. How can she be calm when the smell of blood is lingering around her nose? But she can't even speak anymore. It's all because Sirius just beat someone up mercilessly. This is the face of a cute guy who can't stand it. These sudden events make her realize that the genre of this novel is completely based on prominent and smashing plots. How can she stand something like this? Then suddenly, her hand is grabbed. Sirius gently cares for her, he takes her hand and touches her forehead. Looking at his hand holding hers, thinking back, Sirius did this because he wanted to help her. But she's still very scared. Elena, regaining her composure, says she's fine, she's just surprised. Hearing that, Sirius sighs as if he just threw away his fear. Elena doesn't understand why Sirius sighs like that. Then Sirius gently helps her up. He carries her directly on his back. Then he says a very pampering sentence, "You are so weak," which makes Elena's face turn pale. She is very confused why he is carrying her. Isn't this something that can only be done when the relationship between the two is very good? Up until now, the two of them haven't even had a proper conversation. She also didn't understand why Sirius's attitude had changed so suddenly and felt a little worried. It was as if he was going to punish her. She didn't dare to ask him to let her down, so she just let it be. But this feeling, this warmth, Elena felt really good. Elena just enjoyed the feeling and fell asleep until Sirius had to remind her to get off when she got to her room. She thought about it again and it seemed like she hadn't thanked him yet. Being scared is still scary even though she felt grateful to him. Then she bowed her head and thanked him politely. Sirius stared at her, making her feel guilty. What's wrong? Or did she say it too late so he didn't like it? But unexpectedly, Sirius smiled and said that he was very happy that her complexion finally returned to normal and comforted her that what happened just now shocked him. Elena laughed bitterly. Sirius's face looked like he didn't understand anything. There was probably nothing in the world that surprised Sirius. Then Sirius asked her what she wanted him to do with Joseph. This question made her stunned. Thinking about it again, everything stopped at leaving Joseph beaten to a pulp in the library. He must have learned a valuable lesson for his rude attitude, so she didn't care much, but it would have been better if it hadn't happened right in front of her because she didn't want to be involved with either of them. One was rude and the other was punishing. Sirius suggested that he should go back and break his wrist. This startled Elena and she quickly stopped him. He asked her if she didn't like it. Elena explained gently that it wasn't that she didn't like it, but that he had already learned his lesson. She would tell Joseph not to do it again, but she really didn't want to see any more blood. She took the opportunity to thank Sirius and tell him to rest early today. Sirius looked at her silently. She was about to turn and open the door to her room, but Sirius stopped her. He said that he had come up with a method that he thought was the best. He told her to follow him again. He wanted to go see the Duke and tell him about what happened between her and Joseph. Elena was startled and turned pale. Why did he want the two of them to go see the Duke together? Of course, she didn't dare to go, so she hesitated and couldn't agree. But Sirius reached out to her and told her that if she was scared, she could hold his hand. He tried to convince her even though he knew she was scared. But he said it was very important. Now Elena didn't understand what he was thinking. Why did he suddenly have something to say to the Duke? And it included her and him. She really didn't want to go at all. So she boldly asked if she didn't want to go, could Sirius go alone? Sirius said he would go alone. Before this answer, Elena went crazy because of Sirius's calmness. He knew she would say that, right? Out of nowhere, she was determined and agreed to go with Sirius. She thought it would be better if he went alone, but it would be better if they went together to see what was going on, but now she regretted it. But how could Sirius be smiling so calmly now when he didn't know what the other person was thinking? But she couldn't hate Sirius either. He smiled and asked her if she had made up her mind. If so, let's go together. He naturally took her hand and pulled her away. In this moment, she couldn't help but smile. It was late afternoon and the red sunset enveloped the mansion. In the Duke's room at this time there was a girl. It was the Duke's sister who was questioning why Joseph was beaten by Sirius without any resistance. The sister was afraid and recounted that she had only heard about it from the servants. The Duke angrily grabbed the lamp. He regretted teaching Joseph for 5 years, but it turned out to be only like this. He angrily threw the lamp at his sister, scaring her to death. After that moment, the room returned to a terrifying silence. Although her heart was pounding, the sister had to reassure herself that she couldn't be afraid because she was the closest person to the Duke and after all, it was just a simple candle, right? As the heir of her father, she had to endure it. She tried to endure it because she thought she would become the heir to the endless magic mine that was so rich that even the emperor would be envious and would be the most powerful person who could control everyone. She was determined to take it all. The Duke was silent at this moment and said nothing more. Then he let out a disparaging remark, "It would be better if Sirius was my son." This unexpected remark startled the sister. The Duke or Sirius was the most talented person he had ever met, and he asked his sister if she thought so too. She agreed, "I think so too, Duke." The Duke sneered and continued, "That's right, no matter how you think about it, Sirius is really extraordinary. What I mean is, whether or not I continue to follow His Majesty's orders." The sister immediately flattered her father, "You don't need to listen to anyone, father." The Baron was pleased, believing that this was how he should act as the head of the Road family. Long ago, although the Road family's supernatural abilities had brought them a lot of money, their titles had always been below the royal family. Even though they possessed the ability to read other people's emotions, to overthrow the royal family they had to make a deal with the person with wolf blood, who would be born periodically, so it was very difficult for the successor to rebel. But for a long time, there was no heir to inherit that bloodline, so the status of the Hyperion family was weakened. Even Sirius, the last person with wolf blood who was born after 300 years, was sent to the Duke's family. There is no better time than now. The Duke muttered to himself, indeed, there is no better choice than to make Sirius a part of the Road family. The fastest way is to use marriage to bind him, along with the Duke's only daughter, but he has 2 children. Suddenly, a maid came in and announced that Sirius and Elena wanted to see him. The Duke thought to himself, it's a good time. If it were just Elena, I would have refused to see her, but with Sirius here, I'll let them in. He dismissed his sister. She was obedient on the surface, but she was very curious to know what was going on. As the sister walked out, she met the 2 of them at the door. The sister stared at the 2 children. She didn't know what these children were up to. She would meet them later. The 2 went to the Duke and greeted him. The Duke waved away Sirius's polite apology and said bluntly, "If I wanted to, I wouldn't have let you in." Observing Sirius in front of him, without a ruler to judge, Sirius dared to look him straight in the eye without fear, and even his aura did not show any anxiety. But when he looked at Elena, it was true. No matter how hard he tried, the Duke couldn't see anything. The reason he couldn't see anything was because Elena's ability went beyond the mind, making it impossible for the Duke to read her emotions. He used to think she was special because of that, but just looking at her made him feel disgusted. Then he turned to the main topic and asked what they were doing there. Sirius began to speak, saying that he had found what he wanted and came here to claim his reward. The Duke confirmed that he did say he would reward Sirius with anything he wanted during today's training, and he asked if Sirius had finally found what he wanted. Despite the severe injury that could take his life if neglected, the abilities he demonstrated during the training were truly deserving of a reward. The desperation to cling to life was very much worth nurturing. Sirius continued, saying that he heard the Duke needed to find a tutor soon so that he could continue his studies. The Duke responded that he understood and that perhaps he had focused too much on Sirius's swordsmanship skills and had neglected his studies. He promised that sooner or later, he would find a tutor for him. Sirius took the opportunity to speak up. He proposed that he would be very happy if the Duke allowed Elena to stay by his side during each lesson. That was the reward he wanted to receive. The Duke looked at Sirius, who was holding his daughter's hand tightly, and pondered. Seeing this, he understood that from the beginning, he had noticed when someone like Sirius held someone else's hand. Sirius must have found his place of comfort within the mansion. The Duke felt as if he had discovered a treasure. How convenient. He had just been thinking about how to bind Sirius to the ducal family through marriage, and suddenly this opportunity appeared. Better than a political marriage, a relationship based on natural affection with minimal entanglement with Sirius would be better. He had always thought of Elena as useless, but finally, the Duke found her useful role in the mansion. He thoroughly enjoyed this as if it were a gift given to him. However, on the other hand, he still wanted to hide a secret about having killed Elena's biological father. The story goes back 10 years. In the dungeon, there was a man lying in a pool of blood, barely breathing. It was a man named Linus. The Duke stood in front of him, looking at this dying man with contempt. The Duke's face was expressionless as he looked at him. In the man's eyes, there was still clarity, even though he could no longer stand, and the Duke didn't like it at all. The man scoffed at the Duke, still calling him brother as usual, huh? He clearly remembered the Duke's promise to call him brother forever after for saving the Duke when he was 10 years old, which wasn't funny at all. The Duke was extremely uncomfortable seeing someone who looked exactly like him like this. It made him very uncomfortable. Linus Rode and Hugo Rode, though they were from different mothers, they looked so alike that they were once mistaken for twins, but no one else ever mistook them for each other. The Duke always looked very stern, while the other always had a friendly smile on his face. The Duke told himself that it was okay. Unlike now, the other one looked like he wanted to tear him apart. He sat down in front of the other man and sneered, "That look of hatred on your face makes me so disappointed. I came here to bring you good news." Hearing this, the man was extremely agitated. The Duke sneered, "Of course you understand right away." The good news was that the man's child had just been born. The man smiled and thanked God. Then he seemed to be thinking about something. Then he uttered the name Elena. The man said that if it was a girl, he would name her Elena because he had promised Stacy. The Duke was not happy to hear this. In the family, heirs were forbidden to have their bloodline outside, in other words, to prevent illegitimate children. It was not a good thing for the family when power was scattered everywhere. Even so, the fact that a servant and a nobleman, the man fell in love with a girl named Stacy, he broke the Rode family rules and fled. The Duke of Rode at that time had no mercy, because the Duke of Rode at that time had no mercy, the punishment would surely be death. The only thing that ended their pursuit was that the girl Stacy was pregnant at the time and couldn't run. After the man was recaptured, he was thrown into prison and his leg was broken. There was no room for complacency. Linus remained a rival for the heir position until the end. Until the Duke intervened effectively. The girl volunteered to stay at the Rode mansion after the Duke threatened to kill the man. When he heard her decision to stay, the man also gave up on running away. At this time, the man was still worried about the girl's safety. The Duke said that the girl was still healthy after giving birth. Looking at the way the man was staring at the Duke, one could guess that he was using his power from his golden eyes. It was not a lie, so he couldn't tell that the Duke was extremely confident. The girl had safely given birth to a baby and was completely healthy, despite the request to kill her immediately after childbirth. It has been reported that the child she gave birth to has perfect golden eyes. This event happened simultaneously. In order to raise Elena as his own daughter, the Duke thought it would be better if she didn't have her biological parents. That's why the Duke offered to the man. He said to save the daughter. If the Duke could raise the baby as his own daughter, then no one would know that she was an illegitimate child. The man seemed to understand something. The Duke continued coldly. He uttered coldly that in order for that to happen, the man had to die. Only then would he save the baby. Unexpectedly, the man smiled and agreed without hesitation. The Duke slowly drew his sword. And a knife pierced the man's heart in the blink of an eye. Fresh blood flowed out. The man fell into a pool of blood but still tried to speak his last words. Even in his dying moments, he smiled and thanked the man who killed him. The Duke thought the man was stupid. Who would thank the person who just ended their life? It was really incomprehensible. So Elena grew up as the daughter of Duke Road, a wonderful child with perfect golden eyes. In the history of the family, there was once a man with perfect golden eyes. He said that he could not only read emotions but also do other things. That is the ability to see the future of this world. The owner of perfect golden eyes can see the future from birth and become the savior of the Road family. This story has been secretly passed down to the heirs of the family. If it is true, it will be an amazing supernatural power. But contrary to that hope, Elena disappointed him. Although she had perfect golden eyes, her supernatural power was not so good. Even in the face of death, she did nothing but endure. The Duke thought that it seemed like the pure gold eyes that could see the future were just a meaningless story, but he didn't expect Elena to be able to attack Sirius' heart. Because of his own interests, he agreed to Sirius' request. It has been 10 years since the Duke killed his brother and took his daughter away. He thought that now was finally the time. Scene change, Elena just woke up from her sleep. She rubbed her eyes to regain her composure. She had a dream but couldn't remember anything. She even cried, so it must have been a bad dream. She also wanted to guess what it was about, but she couldn't remember anything. Elena quickly got out of bed. She thought it was useless to cling to something she didn't remember because today was a busy day. Because of what happened yesterday, Elena was quite surprised when Sirius said he wanted her to be there when he trained, but seeing Sirius so excited wasn't bad either. At first she was a little surprised, but now that she thought about it, it was okay. It wasn't until the two of them were walking around the West Tower that the real problem happened. Elena shyly said that Sirius surprised her, but she was glad that the Duke had allowed it. Suddenly Sirius called her name and said he had something to say, which confused her very much. She asked again, "Right now?" and Sirius nodded in confirmation. He approached her, wanting to share a secret. Sirius leaned in close and spoke. But instead, Sirius revealed a secret: he couldn't read. This shocked Elena completely. Her surprised voice startled even the birds in the forest. She couldn't believe it. How could this be? Sirius didn't grow up on the streets, did he? A prince who was already 10 years old still couldn't read? She wasn't sure, but she was certain that the Emperor had something to do with this. She knew how Sirius was treated, but seeing such clear evidence made her feel a little bad. She asked, "Why didn't you tell the Duke?" Sirius replied, "It's like my weakness, so I can't tell anyone." Elena pondered, "But why did he tell you?" It turned out Sirius told her because he wanted to ask her to teach him how to read before the tutor arrived. Hearing this, Elena was speechless with surprise. She thought she had to refuse this request. But in the end, she couldn't refuse, and she sat down at her desk, even studying in her room to teach Sirius. She shyly apologized for keeping him waiting because she overslept. Sirius was very gallant and said he thought the same and had been waiting for a while. Elena thought that even though the two of them were together, they really didn't have any privacy. She couldn't refuse Sirius yesterday, but now was her last chance. She would teach him how to read and then have nothing to do with him anymore. But how could Elena refuse Sirius's cute look right now? He even called her by her name. Elena shivered in fear and stammered back, "What did you just call me?" He explained that since she would be teaching him how to read, she would be his teacher, and he should call Elena, teacher. She gasped, knowing she had no way out. She couldn't believe he wanted them to play this way. She knew what he wanted, but she couldn't. Sirius asked politely, "Then what book shall we start with, teacher?" But Elena unexpectedly pushed him away. She shyly asked, "Do we really have to do this?" He said he wanted her to treat him like a student, in a relaxed way. But how could she be relaxed? This made Sirius a little worried and disappointed. Elena was going crazy because Sirius acted like he was very disappointed, but she could see how happy he was inside. He was definitely not calculating enough. He stared at her and asked, "So what do we do?" We'll talk to each other without honorifics, won't that be better? Elena shook her head quickly. He continued, then I'll let you choose. I'll drop the honorifics with you too, so let's just talk normally. He continued to stare at her with an expression that showed he would not accept no for an answer. So Elena had no choice but to agree. However, she couldn't call Sirius by his first name directly and still called him Your Highness respectfully. Then she also got used to it and called the male protagonist's name, which made him happy and smile brightly. The aura that Sirius exuded was so radiant that Elena couldn't understand why dropping the honorifics made him so happy. She really didn't understand him anymore. After a while of teaching, Elena stretched her shoulders wearily. She looked up and said, "It's getting dark too. Let's stop here for today." Elena groaned to herself. To be honest, she had never taught anyone in her previous life. She couldn't guarantee that she was a good teacher. But she wondered if it was because he was the main character that he was like a genius. He understood and remembered everything she had said, so they had learned a lot. Apart from lunch, the two of them only studied together here, but this was also her only chance to ask Sirius. So she gathered her courage and asked him. She asked, why is Sirius suddenly so nice to her? Elena had been wondering about this since yesterday morning. She hadn't been able to ask him until now, but for some reason she felt a little comfortable being with him. Unexpectedly, Sirius said that Elena was also very good to him. This surprised Elena. She awkwardly denied it, but Sirius was very leisurely, as if he knew everything. He told her that he knew everything. He thought that wanting to be friends with someone who was good to you wasn't strange, but Elena thought Sirius was wrong. In the original novel, she was very wary of people who were good to her, but this time she was an exception. It was because Elena was born as the seventh child and never appeared in the novel afterwards. Maybe Elena had been an exception since she was born. Elena sighed. She still couldn't know how to deal with what would happen in the future, which was very important. Looking at the book that Sirius was about to take home, she was very curious. Was he going to read all of that? Sirius said nonchalantly, yes. She secretly exclaimed that he was really diligent. She said she was glad that he now had the level to read books. She said she was bad at teaching others. Sirius said it's okay, he has also learned how to read children's books, and today he proved himself right. Elena didn't understand what he was proving. Sirius said that she had tried her best to teach him, so he knew Elena had something that could make her passionate. If Elena could find a role that suited her, she would become a useful person. Elena didn't quite understand what he meant. Sirius said with a cold face that useless people not only couldn't help anything, but also died very quickly. To survive, she needed to become useful. Elena felt a little scared at this attitude. She was starting to feel more comfortable around him, so she gradually lowered her guard, but there was still something wrong with Sirius, even at this age. Sirius said that anyway, he knew he could do it. That's why he asked Duke Road for permission for the two of them to study together. Sirius quickly hugged the stack of books and turned to leave, not forgetting to make an appointment to see her again next time. Elena sat back in her room and sighed silently. Sirius was really hard to understand. Then she suddenly saw a piece of paper clipped to the book. She opened it and smiled. Because the words on it were, "Please teach me more tomorrow, Elena." Elena sighed, what a mess. She realized one thing after spending a lot of time with Sirius. Sometimes he acted like a cute little boy, but he was definitely a lunatic. She knew he had his own reasons for that, but she had to avoid him at all costs. If she kept going like this, she would be swept away by a big wave and end up abandoned on a paper boat in a storm. She complained that he was the main character, so he would definitely survive no matter what happened. If she wanted to survive, she had to change her plan. Looking at Sirius's attitude over the past few days, she thought he thought she was on his side. But she didn't know if she should be on his side. What should she do to get Sirius to give up? What should she do? Suddenly she came up with a good plan. He had told her to become a useful person, so there was only one answer. She would become useless. She would become useless and negative like that, and Sirius would not want her around anymore. And her plan was that from now on, instead of doing nothing and becoming useless, she would act like she was useless. With that in mind, she got to work on her plan. And finally, a perfect plan was born. The next day, Sirius was asking her if she wanted to play house. She cheerfully said yes. She thought he was only 10 years old but didn't act his age. She bet he would hate this. But Sirius didn't even know what playing house was. She was very surprised because she didn't think he wouldn't know. She explained that when you play house, you pretend to be a mom and dad and act like you are a mom and dad. Sirius listened and replied that he understood, but he didn't want to argue with her. Elena didn't understand much. It turned out that Sirius heard the maids always talking about how they had argued with their husbands. Elena's face fell when she heard this. She stood up and said she would teach him how to play. Sirius had never been with his parents, so of course he didn't know how to play house. Then she started to draw a straight line and declared that the inside was their house. Sirius gasped, "Is this the house?" But she kept explaining that the two of them would act like an ideal family, they would talk to each other like a couple, so don't forget to speak respectfully. Then she pushed him away and told him to pretend he had just come home. The two of them started playing. Sirius obediently followed her instructions, which made her very satisfied. Elena secretly gloated because she thought Sirius must hate this. That's why she thought the plan was working. She couldn't hide her happiness. She smiled back at Sirius and said, "Honey, are you home?" Sirius blushed at these words and said shyly, "What do you mean, honey?" Looking at Sirius's stiff body, Elena chuckled happily. She was satisfied. She should have done this from the beginning. But she kept feeling a bad feeling, as if she had forgotten something. Everything seemed normal, but she still wanted to continue her game. She completely took on the role of a wife. She said she hadn't finished cooking yet and asked Sirius to cook with her. And Sirius followed her instructions. Sirius was so naive that he even ate the food for real. She had to tell him to pretend to eat. After eating, the two of them held hands and went to bed. Sirius wanted to talk, but she brushed him off and said it was time to go to bed. The two of them woke up and that was it. Sirius with a happy face complained, "That's too bad, I don't want to stop playing yet." He suggested that the two of them continue playing tomorrow. Elena heard something wrong, didn't she? At this moment, her heart suddenly started beating faster when she heard Sirius's way of addressing her. She didn't understand why it was okay for him to call her like that now. She remembered that in the future, Sirius would kill about 10 of his fiancées. Why did she let him call her my love? She must have had a death wish. And Sirius even said that playing house was fun, but her plan was to make him negative. At this moment, Sirius continued to speak. He said he felt very happy for some reason. Elena stared at him silently. This couldn't happen, and so she decided that starting tomorrow, they couldn't play house anymore. The next day, the maid reported that Joseph had recovered. Elena politely thanked the maid for the news, which she didn't know was good or bad. She was about to go to school and spend time with Sirius as usual, but the Duke suddenly wanted to see her, so Sirius was very upset. In that case, she would take this as her next step. At this time, Joseph was lying on the bed with his body in tatters. Elena thought he looked even worse than she had imagined. This was exactly why Joseph shouldn't have done this to Sirius. He was startled to see Elena. He asked uncomfortably, "Why are you here? Are you here to laugh at me?" She explained that she was here because of his apology, and that he always wanted her to treat him like an older brother, so she was here to give him some advice as a younger sister. After the fight, she discovered that the object Joseph had thrown at her was actually the Duke's sword. This made Joseph jealous, so he threw it away. She asked him if he was going to apologize. Joseph gritted his teeth and said the two words, "I'm sorry." Looking at him like this, the girl could tell that he was very afraid of Sirius. Joseph turned his back on Elena when she questioned the sincerity of his apology. He thought she wouldn't let it go, but Elena said, "Why not? You've been punished enough." Elena sighed. She thought that everyone was as petty as he was. The Rode family really didn't trust anyone. She was very angry with Joseph, but it was true that Sirius had overreacted. A sincere apology would be better for Joseph's sake. Sirius would recognize a fake apology without a doubt. Then suddenly, her brother muttered, "Is that true?" If he really apologized sincerely, then she would forgive him and Sirius would leave his wrist alone. Elena's heart cried out, "What's wrong with him? Is he crying now?" She always thought he was a little demon, but now that she saw him trembling with fear, all she saw was a little boy. She said, "How many times do I have to tell you? Don't make me repeat it." At this moment, Joseph burst into tears and his tears streamed down his face. Then he cried out loud like a child. Was he so afraid that Sirius would break his wrist? If that really happened, he would be the first one to be abandoned by the Duke. That was what he was really afraid of. He said between sobs, Elena even tried to help me when it wasn't in her best interest. You're such a fool. Hearing these words made her very angry. She hit him and shouted, I'm trying to help you. Why are you talking to me like that? She said she forgave him not for him, but for herself. Elena didn't want to ruin someone's life over something like this. She didn't want Joseph to feel indebted to her either. She still hated him. She wanted his life to be ruined like the others in the Road family. So his life couldn't end like this. He would get what he deserved. Elena stared at him and said, anyway, you should watch what you're doing from now on. I'm not giving you a second chance. Joseph still sobbed and replied, okay. Then he said, I'm sorry, Elena. Elena stared at him silently. She had the feeling that his second apology was a little more sincere. What a relief. She had dealt with Joseph and now it was Sirius's turn. She wondered if he was back yet. Sirius had said before she left that they would meet again at our house, so he must be there now, right after he was done with his business. Sure enough, Sirius was there. She called him and he turned back with a bright face. She couldn't believe that they called this place home. Sirius was practicing writing his first letters. He told her to look quickly. She secretly assessed that his handwriting was barely readable recently, but now it's not too bad. Sirius had written her name correctly, but his name was a bit strange. Then she helped him correct it. Elena kindly made corrections and did not forget to give additional instructions. But looking at his expression, he was deliberately wrong. Because he wanted to see her write his name. Sirius expressed that he really liked watching her write his name. He was very happy at this moment. Sirius leaned in close, making her a little embarrassed. Unexpectedly, he kissed her on the cheek. Elena blushed and froze. On the contrary, Sirius happily asked what she wanted to do today. He wanted to play house again. But her current state was petrified with embarrassment, but why didn't Sirius have any reaction? She calmed herself down and told herself to stay calm and remember her plan. So she regained her smile and suggested that they watch ants today. Sirius didn't understand what it was. He asked if it was fun, but of course Elena didn't think so. But playing house didn't seem to work because he had a lot of fun this time. This time she chose something completely meaningless and childish. Sirius agreed immediately because that's what she wanted, and then she jumped up and said, let's follow this ant. Then the two followed a group of ants. Just like that, the two of them walked and chatted happily, the main topic revolving around ants. Finally, they stopped at a rather large ant nest. She said that the winged ants are the queen ants and the others are worker ants. Then they realized how long they had been watching these ants. Sirius praised that he thought this game was boring but it was actually very fun, which made Elena very unhappy. It wasn't a success today either, so she wanted to change the subject quickly. Then she asked why her father had called Sirius away this morning. He said that the Duke was going to the capital for work, so the tutor would be coming during that time, and the Duke called him to say goodbye. Elena assessed the situation that Sirius seemed hesitant to tell her about it, probably because the Duke didn't call her anyway. She didn't want to say goodbye to her father either, so it was okay. Now that she had changed the subject, she would stop here and go home. She took Sirius's hand and pulled him away. She thought that Sirius was more obedient today than usual. I wonder what's wrong with him today. She reassured him that they could go out and play together tomorrow, so let's go home now. So the two of them left hand in hand. On the way back, Sirius exclaimed that this forest is really big. He thought it was just a small garden. Elena said she heard that this forest has been here for over 200 years, but she has never been here before. From here, you can see the glittering in the forest. Then she pointed to a tree. Elena was curious to take a closer look, and Sirius spotted something inside. Both of them started searching. Finally, they found a necklace. Sirius immediately deduced that it must have been hidden on purpose in the middle of the forest. Although the chain was a bit rusty, it could still be opened. The two stared at the necklace. Inside was the picture of an extremely beautiful girl. The girl's name was Stacy. Elena suddenly turned around. She ran away quickly. She knew the name on the necklace. She ran quickly to another forest. Then she stopped in front of the tombstones. Sirius followed her and didn't understand why she was leaving like that. She ran to the Duke's manor, which has a family tomb in the back. The Hyperion family sees themselves as divine because they possess mythical blood. Even the road family cannot ignore the royal tradition, so the conspiracy lies here, although no one really cares about it. She came to her senses. Is she crazy? Now she's here, really worried. She took Sirius's hand and told him to follow her. Sirius wondered where they were going. Then the two of them stood in front of a tomb. Looking at the tombstone, the name on it was Stacy. She was Elena's mother. She recounted that she was told that her mother had died after she was born from an infection. She had always thought her mother was an orphan. The current duke only had one wife, and she died shortly after giving birth to her sixth child, so everyone called her an illegitimate child. Clearly, whoever her mother was, she was not the duke's late wife. She also remembered the maids gossiping about this, saying that the duke had a child with a maid named Stacy. That woman had green eyes like his late wife. They said that was why the duke was attracted to her. Those maids also disappeared not long after, so those rumors were all she knew about her mother. However, she had once asked the duke about her mother long ago. She had asked if her mother had any relatives, but he said her mother was an orphan. How his reaction was and how he felt was so long ago that she couldn't remember anymore. All she knew was that she shouldn't ask any more questions. She looked at the picture, the light brown hair and green eyes. The woman in the picture was exactly like what the maids had described. But this woman is an orphan, so why did the duke lie to her? Elena wondered. Suddenly someone called her name. Sirius said he thought this person might be her mother. He said he could see her through Elena, especially her round face. Hearing this, Elena was very embarrassed. Sirius was very bright, and Elena screamed that it was all because of the kiss just now. Now she lost her chance to say anything. Sirius didn't seem to care, so Elena thought she would too. After a while, she came to her senses. She put the necklace around her neck and said that she was her mother. She just found out. She clutched the necklace because she finally had a real glimpse of her mother. Come to think of it, Sirius didn't seem to know anything about his mother either. Elena felt guilty. Why was she so happy? But Sirius didn't seem to be upset. Seeing this, Elena also felt relieved. She took his hand and said that the first thing she would do after she left this place was to find her mother. Sirius wondered if she would leave. Elena said she would leave this place at all costs. After the duke ignored her, she began to hope. She had kept it a secret from everyone. She had been thinking about leaving the duke's house and forgetting about the duke. But she couldn't yet because the duke hadn't given up on her with his golden eyes. But she would leave this place one day, no matter what. Sirius saw her determination and said that if she wanted, he would help. Elena was stunned to look at him. Then she smiled beautifully. It was strange to think that at first she wanted to avoid Sirius as much as possible, so why did she feel so comfortable with him now? A few days later, the duke returned from his trip. He gathered everyone in his room. Elena was also there. She felt suffocated. She had a feeling that he was going to call all his children. But she didn't think he would call her either. This had never happened before. The duke called her and Sirius's names. The other two looked at each other with hatred, and Elena was a little stunned. The duke said that he had brought the tutor as promised. The Duke of Dalton would teach the two of them himself. The class would start tomorrow morning, so please come and introduce yourselves to him, the duke instructed. The two of them listened to him. Elena couldn't imagine the tutor's expression right now. She was very surprised because the duke always looked at her with a look of annoyance and dissatisfaction. But she hadn't seen anything just now. She wondered if she was mistaken, but she didn't think so. Then the duke's words were even more frightening. He dismissed everyone except Elena. She was confused. Why was it her? Sirius suddenly squeezed her hand. She kept wondering why it was her. Everyone left, and now there were only the duke and Elena left. She was terrified, and she didn't even dare to look him in the eye. The duke said, "It's been a long time since we've talked alone like this, Elena." Elena was trembling with fear at this point. He said he knew things hadn't been easy for her. From now on, she would receive everything that a duke's daughter should receive. He reached out to her, causing her to jump. He placed his hand on her shoulder and said he wanted her to live in the main house again. Looking at the duke's silhouette, she unconsciously shivered down her spine. This couldn't be happening. Just like when she was a child, there was a time when she believed her father loved her. The duke dismissed her. Every move he made now scared her. Then she quickly ran off. Looking at Elena's retreating figure. The Duke assessed that this didn't seem easy, but he didn't expect her to open up to him right away. But a child with no one to rely on would naturally gravitate towards her, no matter how afraid she was. He was smug because she still believed he was her father. The Duke was satisfied that everything was finally going his way. Everything was going smoothly, just as he had planned. Elena returned and lay on her bed in a daze. She still couldn't believe that the Duke had given her a new room. Finally, she had a room fit for a noble's daughter, so why did she feel so uncomfortable now? The Duke only rewards those who please him, but she is still hiding her abilities. Nothing has changed. She wonders what the Duke wants from her. That hand had tried to kill her many times. She sat up in anger, thinking that the Duke thought she would be grateful for his kindness after what he had done. Just like she thought, the Rode family was in the midst of a brutal reality check, and Sirius Hyperion was the one who had to do it. Until the child with the golden eyes was born into the Rode family, this family would never be saved. Sirius would bring the Rode family down one day. The downfall of this family was the only salvation for them. But whatever, those useless thoughts kept popping up and making her wake up. She sat up and wanted to walk around the hallway for a while. She opened the door and wondered why the lights were still on. The maid who helped her move her belongings here had said that Sirius would also be next door to her room. So the light was coming from there, it was Sirius. She went over and called his name. He was very happy to see Elena. He said he couldn't sleep and asked if she would like some warm milk. She happily ran over and sat with him. Sirius was staring at her intently. She asked him what he wanted to say to her, but Sirius said nothing. He complimented her that her pajamas looked very nice on her and that she was very cute. Elena shyly babbled some nonsense. Her heart was full of happiness. Sirius was so cute. She just wanted to hug him. When did she want to hug someone else like that? Was it only when she was with someone cute? Sirius's hands fiddled with the milk. He didn't know why he suddenly wanted to hug Elena, but he knew why he felt so uneasy. Although the pajamas looked great on her, Elena should not accept anything from the Duke. Nothing is free, especially when it comes from the Duke. Sirius was relieved that Elena seemed to be wary of the Duke's sudden kindness. In his eyes, she looked so naive when they first met, but now. His train of thought was interrupted when Elena called his name. She asked if he was listening to her. He obviously wasn't, so he smiled sheepishly. She asked if he was worried about class tomorrow. She couldn't remember if the Viscount had appeared in the principal's office. She felt like she had heard his name somewhere, but she wasn't sure. Everything was different from the principal's office now. Things wouldn't have been like this if it wasn't for her. Sirius thought for a moment. Then he said that he was happy to think that he would be able to study with her. Elena didn't see anything to worry about either. No matter what the Viscount was like, things would ultimately go Sirius's way. All she had to do was keep an eye on him and follow her plan. She would purposely fail all her exams. She was a little tired at the moment, so she yawned. Unexpectedly, Sirius saw this and suggested that the two of them sleep together there. He said it just seemed like she didn't want to go back to her room either. She confirmed that this was true, as she didn't like the quiet room at all. She recounted how she had once been able to hear everything Sirius was doing. Then the two of them pretended to be camping. In the end, the two of them fell asleep hand in hand. Looking up at the ceiling, it was so beautiful. The chandelier looked like a starry sky. She was lost in thought, thinking that she had never actually gone camping before. I wonder how beautiful it could be out there. As if understanding her heart, Sirius suggested that when they both woke up, they should plan a real camping trip together. He added that it would be so much fun. Just thinking about spending time with her made him eager for tomorrow. Elena's heart was no longer beating in rhythm. Just a moment ago, she was thinking about how she would ruin all her schoolwork and plan to escape. Now, it was because of those stars. Those plans suddenly became useless. She felt this way because of Sirius. For some reason, when she was with Sirius, she felt like he would never abandon her, no matter how useless she was. Time passed and 4 years had gone by. At this time, someone called out urgently, "Lady Elena." The maid asked her in a hurry if she was going out again today. "Master Joseph is looking for you," she said, but Elena didn't care much. Because she had a date with Sirius today. With that, she quickly left. Sirius had been waiting for her. She called out his name loudly. For years had passed, and the little boy of 5 was now very handsome. Elena smiled happily and greeted him. The two communicated with each other using a secret code that only they understood. The two went to a lounge and ate ice cream together. Sirius teased her that she ran fast when it came to sweets, didn't she? She replied happily, of course I had to run here quickly, or the ice cream would melt. She said she hadn't had a proper lunch, so she was a little hungry. If she had known it was strawberry ice cream, she would have run twice as fast. Sirius got to the point and asked what the Duke had said to her. Elena replied, it was the same as usual. After the Duke's attitude towards her changed for years ago, she began to live the life of a noble lady. The Duke gave her the best of everything she could want. Moreover, the Duke treated her as if he loved her very much, just like he had done before. It was as if the year she had been abandoned had never happened. Once the Duke even told her that she was the only child he truly loved. He told her not to be surprised to hear these words, that he didn't need her to feel the same way, he just wanted her to know how he felt. The Duke put on a sad expression, but the emotion she saw through the golden eyes of the Road family said, what a nuisance. But she wasn't surprised at all. The Duke had never felt guilty from the beginning. He had never apologized to her, not even a fake apology. All he did was buy her gifts and keep saying nice things to her over and over again. The fact that the Duke and she ate together, just the two of them, had made her two sisters jealous in the past, but now it made Elena feel uncomfortable. For a few days like this, Sirius would often bring her ice cream, which made her feel better. She happily thanked Sirius. But as she looked over at him, she was startled. Why was he angry now? She guessed it wasn't because she was late in saying thank you. As if she realized his worry, she took the initiative to say that nothing was wrong. The Duke had just asked her what she was doing and if she needed anything, just like he always did. When she was little, Sirius would always ask her directly if he wanted to know. But now it was different. His mood was like that of a sullen teenager. He had grown up so much now and was getting more and more handsome. Sirius had also grown taller. They ate the same food, but Sirius's legs were very long. She observed and exclaimed, Sirius, you've gotten taller. Sirius replied, you mean since I saw you yesterday? I'm sure that's impossible. The two continued to argue loudly and noisily, filling the room. She pulled him somewhere with her. She asked Sirius when he had gotten taller. She was sure he had been shorter than her before. She recounted how she had been surprised when she had noticed that they were starting to be the same height. At that time, the two of them had almost lost their lives. She was also comparing her height to Sirius's and she wondered when he had gotten so tall. But Sirius still reassured her that he wasn't taller than her, that it wasn't true. She worried why she felt so bad. She always knew that he would be taller one day, but she wanted Sirius to stay short and cute for a little while longer. She insisted that she was still a little taller and told Sirius not to forget it. Just as the two were about to finish their argument and start working on their homework, there was a knock at the door that interrupted them. She quickly ran off because it was time to eat. The maid brought food in for the two of them. She placed it on the table that Sirius had set up. Sirius stared at the maid, suspicious because he had never seen her before. The maid bowed her head and introduced herself as Gina, who had served the Viscount in the capital before and had then followed him here. Sirius wondered if she had come all the way here just for the Viscount. He thought about this as he reached out to take a cookie. He thought the Viscount seemed to come here alone and didn't like to talk much about himself. Suddenly, Elena slapped his hand away as he was about to take a cookie. She worriedly said, no, don't eat that. Sirius wondered why not. She said the cookies were not a problem. Elena had learned that the maid Gina was an assassin sent to kill Sirius. She could feel the intense hatred radiating from her, as if she could stab him right there. She wondered if the Emperor had sent her. She wouldn't be surprised at all if he was the one behind it. The cookies had to be poisoned. Knowing this, she couldn't help but help Sirius. Suddenly, she stood up, took his hand tightly, and apologized for hitting Sirius. Sirius didn't blame her and even seemed to understand the situation. Sirius suggested that the two of them should go back to their room right away. For him, poisoned food wasn't a first-time experience. He had been poisoned before. He had had trouble walking, but he had still managed to find a safe place to hide. Surviving poisoning was just one of them. He had to survive the assassins too. But poisoning his food was a bold move. Even if it was the Emperor, was he really sending assassins to assassinate the prince in the Duke's mansion? Maybe the poison in the cookies would take effect slowly. Sirius suggested that the two of them stay together. They might have put something in the cookies, so if they left like this, the maid would be suspicious. He stared at her intently as if he wanted to say something. Finally, he asked Elena, "We're on the same side, right?" Elena hesitated for a few seconds before replying, "Of course." Hearing this, Sirius beamed and told her that she could trust him. He would never let someone on his side get hurt.